The aftermath of the clash at the Trident still lingered in the air. Metallic tangs of blood, the damp scent of churned mud, the bitterness of spent rage. Men lay strewn across the shallows, some already cold and forever stilled, while others drew their last ragged breaths under a leaden sky. Dying horses screamed and thrashed, their riders flung into the water's arms as the living scrambled to save themselves, or gathered the scattered standard of a sundered cause. In the midst of this carnage stood Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the rubies inlaid on his black armor slick with a sheen of sweat and spray. His silver-gold hair was damp with the river, plastered to his brow, and the same river water trickled down his cheeks like ghostly tears. Only a sliver of sunlight dared break through the gray cloud cover, catching the ruby in the hilt of Rhaegar's sword, so it glimmered fiercely in the gloom. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, truly breathe in that leaden air, and listened for the pulse in his ears. The distant thunder of battle still rumbled beyond the huddled lines where the loyalists had beaten back the rebels. But in this very spot, the place he had feared might be his grave. The fighting had at last ended. Robert Baratheon's great warhammer lay some paces away, half submerged in silt. Its spiked head was reddened with gore. Robert himself had been taken from the shallows by 2 loyalist knights, his breathing shallow, his face so pale that it almost looked blue. But he was breathing. Rhaegar had won. Somehow, in that final clash of hammer against sword, the Targaryen had emerged triumphant with an expert twist and a thrust that brought the rebel lord to his knees. The blow had left Robert's chest battered and his armor sundered, and though he had not died there in the water, no one knew if he would survive the day. The prince's heart thundered like a caged beast within him. His arms felt as if they weighed 1,000 stones. He had fought so many men that day, lashing out with precise strikes, turning aside savage blows, ducking under swings that whistled viciously near his skull. The sweet music that he once cherished, lyres, harps, quiet strings, was drowned by the cacophony of war. If not for the hush that had fallen once Robert toppled, he might not have known the taste of silence again. A soldier bearing the Targaryen sigil approached, stepping gingerly over a pile of bodies that bobbed in the shallows. The soldier's features were blurred by a mixture of river mud and streaked blood. "Your Grace," he began, though by all rights Rhaegar was still a prince, not yet the king. Yet there was no time to correct formality. Rhaegar only lifted his gaze in silent acknowledgement. The soldier bowed his head. "A host of them is retreating west, beyond the fords. Our lines push them, but many are scattering. Word is Lord Stark still holds the neck." Rhaegar's chest tightened. They had not ended the war, even if they had taken down its head. Yet the advantage was now firmly in his hands, and the glimmer of renewed hope for House Targaryen lifted him from the shadows of desperation. The crown had been on the brink, with father's madness driving lords to fear for their families and their lives. Yet here, on the banks of the Trident, Rhaegar had seized the chance to show that not all Targaryens were shaped by the same fire. If the rumors of father's atrocities had fanned the flames of rebellion, perhaps the prince's honor and skill might douse them. He sank to one knee in the shallows. Water rushed around him, cold against his bruised thighs. He ran a trembling hand over his face. The rivulets of water from his gloves mingled with sweat and blood. He closed his eyes and thought, for a moment, of Elia, her soft eyes the color of warm dawn. He thought of the children too, little Rhaenys with her bright smile, and Aegon in his cradle. Let them be safe in King's Landing, he prayed to the Seven. Let him soon return to them and ensure this bloody rebellion truly ended before more innocents died. A distant scream, a call of Targaryen, in terror, forced his eyes open again. Soldiers loyal to the crown were pursuing what was left of the rebels scattered on the opposite shore. Rhaegar rose and summoned what strength remained in him, gesturing for his knights to show mercy. The men had already spilt enough blood, and slaughter was not the best foundation on which to rebuild the realm. But his voice, hoarse from shouting commands in the fray, fell on ears too consumed by the thrill or fury of the fight. Rhaegar wanted to call out again, but his voice caught, and he ended up coughing violently, spitting out river water he must have swallowed in the melee. He felt a steadying hand on his elbow, Sir Miles Mouton, a man who once squired for him. Miles offered a supportive nod, a slight quirk of his lips that nearly formed a reassuring smile. "Your Grace, the day is ours," Miles said quietly, leaning in so Rhaegar could hear him above the distant clash of steel and the anguished cries from the dying. "We should see to Robert Baratheon, and perhaps—" He didn't finish that thought. He didn't need to. They both knew that if Robert died in captivity, it might end the rebellion decisively. But it might also fan the flames of Stark vengeance. Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon were closer than brothers. The realm knew that much. If Robert was lost, Eddard's fury could make him a continuing threat for House Targaryen's fragile hold. Rhaegar stared across the swirling waters that still ran ruddy with blood. He remembered Robert's final roar as he lunged forward, warhammer raised high. It had been a challenge spoken from the depths of hatred. Robert had wanted vengeance. For Lyanna Stark. For all the rumored injustices laid at the Targaryen throne's feet. Rhaegar remembered the way Robert's blow almost caved in half his chest. Had the rebel's foot not slipped in the debris of the river's edge, that savage blow would have found Rhaegar's heart. Instead, Rhaegar's own sword thrust had found a chink in Robert's breastplate. The force of that single, desperate stab had knocked Robert back. The sight of Baratheon's blood stunned the battlefield for the barest fraction of a heartbeat, long enough that men of both sides had paused, uncertain, until the rebel giant had fallen. Now Robert lay under watch, his life balanced on a razor's edge. Rhaegar's victory had come at a desperate cost. Countless men lay dead, among them Targaryen loyalists and rebels both. There was no rejoicing, only a grim acceptance that the rebellion's main impetus had been dealt a crushing blow. Word would spread, first as rumor, then as truth etched in raven scrolls. Lords still wavering might reconsider before raising arms. Yet was it enough to quell the realm's roiling turmoil? The prince could not yet say. He forced himself to stride toward the place where Robert was said to be kept. The small stretch of riverbank was already littered with the bodies of men who had fought to protect Robert in his final stand. Some wore stags on their armor, others carried the wolf of House Stark or the falcon of House Arryn. Now, they were motionless lumps amid the soggy reeds. In the midst of it all, several knights in shining Targaryen plate stood guard around Robert's prone form. Maester Meryon, borrowed from the royal baggage train, was hunched over Robert, brow furrowed as he struggled to staunch the bleeding. Rhaegar's boots squelched in the mud as he approached. The knights parted, allowing him to see the man who had nearly taken everything from him. Robert's breath rasped in his chest. His eyes were closed, though occasionally his eyelids fluttered. His thick black hair was matted to his brow, and his broad chest rose and fell with difficulty. He had been stripped of his plate, the sundered pieces discarded, revealing a brutal bruise that was darkening over his left side. A trickle of blood seeped from a deep gash near his ribs, and every so often he gave a faint moan, as if somewhere in the recesses of his unconscious mind. His anger still raged. Rhaegar knelt beside him, ignoring the pain in his own limbs. He rested a hand lightly on Robert's shoulder. This was the man who had spurred a realm into war, whose betrothal to Lyanna Stark had made him a step away from uniting the Baratheons and Starks in a powerful alliance. Rhaegar had never thought himself cruel enough to want Robert dead. Even now, seeing how close to death Robert was, he felt no exultation, only a somber weight. The realm had shed blood, burned in father's fires, and starved through the chaos. Rhaegar wanted peace more than he wanted vengeance or the cold satisfaction of triumph. "Will he live?" the prince asked, his voice low, uncertain. He looked up at Maester Meryon, who wore the chain of many metals around his neck. The maester's lips thinned. "If the gods will it, I've done all I can here. A warm tent, a bed, and fresh bandages are needed. He's lost much blood." His eyes flickered from Robert's battered form to Rhaegar's face. "I beg your pardon, your grace, but you ought to see to your own wounds as well. You're battered, and if that cut on your forearm grows infected, we may lose you too after all you've done." Rhaegar shook his head. "He comes first," he murmured, and gestured to the knights. "Help me move him, carefully." The knights hesitated only a moment before slipping their arms under Robert's unconscious form. With a soft grunt of effort, they lifted him. The faint trickle of blood dripping onto the muddy ground made Rhaegar's stomach twist. So much death had come from the rift between them. Between Targaryen and Baratheon. The events that had spun out of Father's madness, and perhaps Rhaegar's own mysteries. If only the realm could be given a chance to heal. As he stood, Rhaegar's legs trembled with fatigue. He took in the devastation around him. The loyalist banners were rising in ragged triumph above the churned battlefield. Several men had begun to gather the dead, carefully separating friend from foe. Some prayed as they worked, the sight of so many corpses stirring fear and reverence for the gods. Others scavenged among the bodies. Rhaegar's stomach turned at the sight, but he lacked the voice and strength to halt them just now. War brought out the best and the worst in men. He paced after those carrying Robert, wincing with every step. Blood seeped from a rent in his own armor near his ribs, though the wound beneath might be shallow. The clang of steel and the hush of anguished moans accompanied him like some twisted marching song. Across the water, the remnants of the rebel army were in disarray. The standard of the crowned stag had toppled. Some men tried to regroup, while others simply threw down their weapons and ran, seeking only survival. Dawn was not far off. The sky wore a charcoal veil, hints of pale light creeping in at the horizon. The muddy bank rose to a small slope, lined with a cluster of tents that formed the Targaryen host's encampment. Smoke from dying cook fires drifted in the faint breeze, carrying the stench of horse sweat and unwashed men. The flap of the largest tent parted as Rhaegar's men carried Robert inside, laying him gently on a cot that creaked under his weight. Already, someone had lit lanterns, bathing the interior in a warm glow that felt jarringly incongruous compared to the misery beyond. Rhaegar stood at the threshold, letting his gaze adjust. Shadows danced along the canvas walls. A swirl of tense voices greeted him. The anxious whispers of knights who once might have prayed for Robert's head. Now they murmured uncertainly, unsure what the prince would do next. Rhaegar stepped inside, pressing a hand to his side. The cut burned. Warm, sticky blood still oozed beneath his shattered breastplate. He should see a maester, but he needed to ensure some kind of stability first. He thought of his father, King Aerys, sitting the Iron Throne in the Red Keep. The knowledge of what the king might do should the rebels come crawling to his mercy weighed heavily on Rhaegar. The father's shadow loomed over him at all times. The man who had once been handsome and gracious, but had become twisted by suspicion and cruelty. If Rhaegar truly had the realm's best interest at heart, perhaps it was time he took the reins firmly, even if that meant opposing his father's darker impulses. But how, precisely, could that be done? The lines of succession were not easily bent. There were loyalist lords, yes, but many had lost faith in Aerys, even as they pinned their final hopes on Rhaegar. If the rebellion was truly to be snuffed out, the crown needed to be in hands that could restore honor, not stoke more fires. He crouched beside the cot. Robert's breathing came in ragged bursts. His face was set in an expression of pain, even though he was unconscious. Rhaegar's own breath hitched in his chest. He thought of Lyanna Stark for an instant, of how the rumors had grown about her and about him. Perhaps that was the seed of Robert's hatred. Perhaps not. In any case, the truth was complex and dangerous, and Rhaegar had no desire to let the realm drown in rumor any longer. He became aware of Sir Barristan Selmy entering the tent. Kingsguard Knight removed his dented helm and offered a tired bow. "My prince," he said in a low voice. Barristan was as worn and bloodied as any man on that field, but his eyes still held that unwavering loyalty and that keen understanding of duty. "The men are calling it your victory. They're calling you the savior of the crown." Rhaegar almost wanted to laugh, though the motion might tear his wounded side. Savior.Tumu. What a concept, after so many atrocities had been done in the Targaryen name. But there would be time to sort through the contradictions and burdens of that title later. For now, Rhaegar only sighed. "We have not won anything lasting until the rest of the rebels lay down arms or come to terms. The Lords Arryn and Stark remain in rebellion, and so does House Tully, though perhaps with Robert fallen, they will relent. Mandatory to see. Barristan nodded gravely. Word will be on the wind soon. Many lords who rallied behind Robert may surrender. They followed him because they believed him unstoppable on the battlefield. Today, you've proven otherwise. Rhaegar tasted the faint bitterness of iron as he bit the inside of his cheek. The euphoria of victory was so short-lived when he saw the piles of dead men outside. We must show them we are not bent on slaughter, he said quietly. We must give them reason to stand down before more blood is shed. Ser Barristan gave a curt bow of acknowledgement. With your leave, I shall help spread word that Robert Baratheon is in your custody. Perhaps that news alone will hasten peace. Rhaegar inclined his head in thanks, though a weary sadness weighed on him. As Barristan left, the prince turned to the maester who was fussing over Robert's bandages. Make sure he's comfortable. He paused. He's not to be harmed. Anyone who tries otherwise, on my authority, will face justice. Here. The maester looked startled at the steel in the prince's voice. Then he nodded his understanding. Outside the tent, the battlefield began to settle into a grim rest. The moans of the wounded lingered, and the occasional shouted command broke the silence. The gray gloom of the sky threatened to brighten, but the sun hid yet behind thick clouds. Soldiers, exhausted and caked in mud, milled about, tending their mounts, searching the bodies of the fallen for any hint of life. Carts rumbled by as men collected the wounded for treatment or the dead for burning or burial. Not far from the tent, Rhaegar spotted Sir Jonathan Darry, another of his Kingsguard, who wore a fatigued expression. He was speaking quietly to a group of young knights, no older than 20, from the looks of their wide, dazed eyes. As Rhaegar drew near, he heard murmurs about the final clash, about how the rubies on the prince's armor had shone like an omen, about how Robert's warhammer had rung against Rhaegar's shield so powerfully that lesser men would have died outright. Myths were being woven before Rhaegar's eyes, half-truths and legends in the making. He caught Jonathan's gaze, and the knight straightened. My prince, he said, cutting off his own tale. The field is ours, but not all the rebels have laid down arms. We found pockets of resistance. I've ordered them pressed into surrender or forced back. Some have parted ways for the mountains, but they're few. Rhaegar wiped mud from his face with the back of his gauntlet. His hand came away smudged with grime and the faint streaks of blood. We should accept the surrender of any who throw down their weapons. Give them quarter. He paused, wrestling with the knowledge that his father would want them all punished. But father was not here, and the madness of the past years demanded a new way forward. Once they're disarmed, we'll see about ransoms or pardons. But let it be known that those who continue to fight will be met with our swords. Jonathan inclined his head. The younger knights exchanged uncertain looks, but they had no orders from King Aerys, only from Prince Rhaegar. That would have to suffice. The prince nodded to them all, then turned away. His side burned with every step, and the white noise of blood rushing in his ears made it difficult to think clearly. He knew he needed the maester's attentions himself, yet he had one more task to see to first. He walked along the river's edge, letting the swirling waters brush against his boots. The clash of swords had all but ceased now, and the hush of morning stretched across the banks of the Trident. Occasional flickers of movement from retreating rebels flickered through the distant trees, but none seemed ready to mount another charge. They had lost their leader, and with him perhaps, their will. Rhaegar found himself halting near a cluster of battered men bearing the Targaryen dragon on their cloaks. Among them was a tall, stoop-shouldered man with a face etched by worry. Ser Raimund, if Rhaegar recalled correctly. The man had proven himself loyal back at the siege of Gulltown, or so Rhaegar had heard. Rhaegar approached him with a curious gaze. What news of the other rebel leaders? He asked softly, forcing his voice above the hiss of the water. Ser Raimund wiped sweat from his brow. We've had no word from the Valemen. Lord Jon Arryn did not come to the Trident with Robert, so they say. As for Lord Stark, he was not seen here on the battlefield. He's rumored to be further south, near the Twins, rallying the Tullys. We caught a few scouts that said the Vale stands with the rebels still. Button? Rhaegar nodded, though he felt a pang. Ned Stark would be furious when he heard of Robert's defeat, but also likely frantic to rescue his friend. There could be more bloodshed if the next moves weren't handled carefully. We must send word to them, Rhaegar said. And to House Tully. Make them understand the war need not continue. Then, Sir Ryman bowed low and promised to see it done. As he walked away, Rhaegar felt his strength falter. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he stumbled slightly. His side ached, and hot wetness trickled under his armor. He heard a distant exclamation from one of his knights, but his vision blurred at the edges. The fatigue of battle had finally overwhelmed him. He tried to take another step. The world tilted. He became aware of arms catching him, voices calling for the maester, the clang of armor, and the hurried rush of men. Then a swirl of blackness descended, as though some cosmic curtain closed over him. When his eyes opened again, he found himself lying in a bed of his own, inside the very same grand tent where Robert Baratheon also rested, though separated by a divider so that each might have a measure of privacy. Night had fallen once more, or so it seemed by the dim glow of lantern light. The scents of boiled herbs filled the space, laced with a coppery tang of congealed blood. His side felt tight, and when he tried to move, a sharp sting pinned him in place. Slowly, carefully, he pressed a hand to the bandages wound around his torso. Memory returned in fragments. The triumph at the Trident, Robert's collapse, the swirl of panic as Rhaegar realized he was bleeding more than he thought. "Lie still," came a gentle voice. Maester Merrion appeared at the bedside, his chain clinking softly. "You lost a fair amount of blood, but with rest, the wound should mend. It was a nasty gash, but not deep enough to pierce anything vital." Rhaegar took a shuddering breath, wincing at the pressure in his ribcage. "How long?" he began. "You've been drifting in and out for the better part of the day," the maester said, pressing a cool hand to Rhaegar's forehead. "It's well into the night now." Rhaegar's gaze darted to the divider. "And Robert?" The maester frowned, choosing his words with care. "He lives, though he is not yet awake. The fever took him, and I've been fighting to keep it down. We shall see if the gods grant him the strength to open his eyes by the morrow." Rhaegar closed his eyes for a moment, relief and worry swirling. If Robert died, the war might grow more complicated in some ways. Ned Stark would never forgive such a loss, nor would the Stormlords who revered House Baratheon. If Robert lived, perhaps peace might be brokered, or perhaps the man's hatred would flare anew. Rhaegar inhaled slowly, reminding himself that the realm's future hinged on cautious steps. He drifted in and out of a painful half-sleep in the hours that followed, aware of the bustle outside. The occasional tramp of boots, the murmur of hushed voices reporting new developments, the faint whinnies of horses. Time slipped by like a slow, sticky tide. When next he stirred with more clarity, he saw shadows dancing on the canvas walls. A brazier glowed in the corner, and a small pot of what smelled like broth simmered gently. The maester was gone, but a younger acolyte sat dozing on a stool nearby, presumably to watch over the prince in the maester's absence. Rhaegar lay there, the weight of everything pressing upon him. The war had not ended in a single day, but it might have shifted irrevocably. He thought of King's Landing, of Elia and the children, of how Aerys might be reacting to the news. Would father be furious that the prince had spared Robert's life? Or would he simply see it as a chance to make a spectacle of Robert's execution, as he had done with Rickard and Brandon Stark? That notion sent a chill through Rhaegar's veins. He would not allow another atrocity like that to stain the crown. Yet to stand up to his father directly was no small matter. Aerys still had men loyal to him, men who would kill at his slightest command. For Rhaegar to ensure peace, he might have to confront father's tyranny in a more definitive way, though the time for that conversation had not yet come. The next day dawned cold and gray, if the sliver of light at the tent's edge was any indication. Rhaegar managed to sit up with the acolyte's help, swallowing a few spoonfuls of thin broth that tasted bland but soothed his parched throat. Each movement sent darts of pain through his stitched side, but at least he did not feel feverish. He asked after Robert, and the acolyte said in a timid voice that the man still had not woken, but continued to cling to life. The fever was somewhat abated, but he remained unconscious. Late in the morning, Ser Barristan entered the tent and immediately bowed to Rhaegar. The older knight's face was lined with weariness. "My prince," he said softly, "how fares your wound?" Rhaegar attempted a faint smile. "Better than it might have had you not come to my aid at the end of that battle. If the rumors are true, you saved me from a second blow by Robert that could have finished me." "Namnan?" Barristan bowed his head in deference. "I was merely fulfilling my duty. My blade is ever at your side." He glanced at the divider and lowered his voice. "Your Grace, scouts have returned with some tidings. Lord Tywin Lannister has so far remained aloof, as if waiting to see which way the wind will blow. The Lords Tully and Stark are still said to be in open defiance, but their men are dispirited. Many do not wish to continue the fight now that the Baratheon star has fallen." "Now, Dako." Rhaegar pressed his lips together. Tywin Lannister was as dangerous as any threat. He had once been hand to Aerys, but the relationship had soured. The Lannisters had not committed themselves to either side openly, waiting, perhaps calculating the best possible advantage. That vantage might change now that the Trident was a Targaryen victory. A pragmatic man might choose the surety of the crown, rather than risk defeat. But Tywin's presence was always a gamble. Barristan continued, "We've sent out ravens on your orders, telling all that Robert Baratheon is in your custody, that you have granted him mercy, and that you are willing to offer terms to those who bend the knee." Rhaegar inclined his head. "Thank you, Ser Barristan." He exhaled slowly, feeling the sharp tug of stitches in his side. "We must show them that we seek reconciliation, rather than the total ruin of their houses. The realm has bled too much." Barristan hesitated before speaking again. "My prince, what do you plan if Lord Stark refuses to yield? We know how fiercely loyal he is to Robert. If Robert were to succumb to his wounds, Ned Stark might never lay down arms." Rhaegar stared at the tent's sloping ceiling. The canvas dyed in the Targaryen black and red. He recalled Ned Stark from the fleeting glimpses he had seen of the young man, a quiet, honorable figure. The memory of Brandon Stark's death at King Aerys's hands still haunted the realm. Would Ned fight to the bitter end out of love and vengeance? Perhaps. But Rhaegar harbored a small hope that Ned's sense of honor could be reached if shown the chance for peace. The alternative was more war, and Rhaegar's soul was too burdened for that. "We'll wait for Robert to wake," Rhaegar said, though he could not be sure Robert would ever open his eyes again. "Then we shall see if we can come to terms. If we cannot, we may have to march on the north and the Vale. But I pray it does not come to that." Barristan bowed once more, stepping back. "I'll leave you to rest, my prince." When Rhaegar was alone, he sat quietly with his thoughts, occasionally drifting into a restless doze. The pain in his side ebbed slightly as the maester's potions took effect, numbing him enough to imagine the future. He saw in his mind's eye a realm free from the horrors of father's cruelty, a realm where the rivers did not run red with the blood of lords and small folk alike. If victory at the Trident could lead to that outcome, perhaps all this tragedy might at least pave the way to something better. He awoke sometime after midday to a flurry of motion behind the divider. The maester's urgent whispers, the scrape of a stool on the ground. Rhaegar's heart lurched. He carefully swung his legs over the side of the cot, ignoring the throb in his ribs, and shuffled toward the divider. A wave of dizziness threatened to topple him, but he steadied himself on a wooden chair, and with slow pained steps, peeked around the canvas partition. Maester Marion stood over Robert Baratheon, checking bandages and pressing the back of his hand to Robert's brow. Robert stirred, his eyes blinking open for a flicker of a second, glassy with fever. He made a low noise in his throat, a sound of confusion perhaps, or anger, or both. His thick beard bristled, and his fingers twitched against the rough linens of the cot. Rhaegar took a hesitant step forward, his eyes fixed on the rebel who had almost killed him, and whom he had almost killed in turn. Robert's gaze flickered around, struggling to focus. Then, for an instant, it landed on Rhaegar. The baritone voice, so powerful in battle, emerged as a rasp. "You!" Robert croaked. His breath labored. "What?" Rhaegar knelt slowly, biting back pain. He spoke softly. "You're in my tent. You're alive. The battle is done." Robert's brow furrowed. He tried to rise, but the maester gently pressed him down. "Your wounds need healing," Marion warned. "Stay still." For a moment, Robert's gaze was wide, as though the memories of the Trident rushed back. Then a scowl curled his lips. "Should Vev killed you," he muttered. There was no real heat in his tone, only the haze of pain. "Or you me?" Rhaegar dared to offer the faintest tilt of his mouth. "Perhaps, but here we both are. Fate or the gods or chance, choose your reason." Robert's eyes closed again, his breath ragged. The lines of tension around them were deep. "Lyanna," he murmured, the name sliding past his cracked lips. "You took her." Rhaegar felt an old wound open within himself. He thought he had prepared for this moment, for Robert's accusations and hatred. But the weight of that single name was like a dagger to the gut. "We'll talk of it when you are stronger," he said quietly. He could not speak of Lyanna now. Not in front of the maester, and not while Robert's mind reeled in fever. Robert's lips twitched into what might have been a snarl or a grimace of pain. Then he fell back into unconsciousness, as if the effort of forming words had sapped whatever strength remained in him. The maester glanced at Rhaegar, eyes reproachful, then busied himself with a bowl of cooling water and a cloth to dampen Robert's brow. Rhaegar lingered a moment, staring at the big man's face. This was the man who had threatened the throne, who had shattered Targaryen forces at Summerhall and at the Battle of Ashford, who had garnered so much respect and admiration from the realm. Now, he was a broken figure on a cot, his fate uncertain. The chaos of that reflection unsettled Rhaegar. So much hinged on the next steps. At last, he pulled himself away, returning to his own bed and sinking back with a soft groan. The intrusion of sorrow weighed on him, memory swirling. The image of Lyanna Stark's face, the swirl of cloak, and the hush of the godswood. He had tried to follow what he believed was destiny, had tried to fulfill some prophecy he barely understood. In pursuing that, he had unleashed a war that almost destroyed the kingdom. So much had spun from that single choice, and so much was still left to unravel. He dozed in fits, rousing only when a messenger arrived with an urgent call. It was nearly dusk again, the shadows outside long and faint. Sir Miles Mouton appeared at the flap, bowing, his expression set in lines of resolve. "My prince, there's a matter that requires your attention," he said softly, mindful of the wounded in the tent. "We've taken several highborn captives, sons and cousins of those who followed Robert. They ask for terms of surrender." Rhaegar sighed, shifting to rise. The pain in his side seemed more tolerable after the rest, though still a sharp reminder of his own mortality. He drew on a loose-fitting tunic, stepped into boots and gestured for Sir Miles to lead on. Outside, a smattering of stars had begun to glimmer in the purplish sky. Cook fires dotted the riverbank, sending up fragrant curls of smoke. Night had fallen, but the camp was awake and guarded. Near the edge of the camp, Rhaegar found half a dozen men bound at the wrists, though clearly men of some standing judging by their richly embroidered, if now bloodied, cloaks and doublets. They looked weary and bruised, and behind them stood Targaryen knights, watchful. The prisoners bowed awkwardly as Rhaegar approached. One, a balding man in his middle years with a weathered face, cleared his throat. "Your Grace," he began, hesitancy weighting his words. "I am Lord Garrison Penrose, sworn to Storm's End. We fought for Lord Robert, but, well, you have him in your custody. We see no point in more bloodshed." Rhaegar regarded the man, his own expression unreadable. "Do you yield then?" Lord Penrose swallowed hard and nodded. We yield, and we speak for many. If you would allow us to send word to our families, to the other lords in the Stormlands, perhaps we can end this rebellion from our side." "Nomen traitor." Rhaegar studied the half-dozen men. They were battered, frightened, and uncertain of their fates. He drew in a breath, letting it out slowly. This was his chance to show mercy, to demonstrate that the Targaryen name did not always mean fire and blood. "You may send word," Rhaegar said at last. "Tell them I mean to restore peace." that I will honor those who lay down arms with fair treatment." He paused, meeting Lord Penrose's eyes. "But they must acknowledge the crown. If they persist in rebellion, they'll face the might of the throne." Lord Penrose nodded fervently. "They will see reason once they know Robert is, well, bested." He glanced at the tent that loomed in the distance. "Will he live?" Rhaegar dipped his head, unsure how much to reveal. "He is in the hands of the gods now." With a motion of his hand, he gestured for the knights to unbind the prisoner. "Tonight, you shall have a tent, food, and parchment to write your letters. Sir Miles, see to it they are treated well, under guard, of course." Member Worship. The moment the ropes fell away, the prisoners rubbed their wrists, relief etched into their features. This was not what they had expected from the so-called Dragon Prince, it seemed. Perhaps they had prepared themselves for torture or swift execution. Instead, Rhaegar offered them a road to reconciliation. Whether or not they would genuinely take it remained to be seen, but at least the seeds were planted. As Miles led them away, Rhaegar lingered by the river again. The moon's reflection shimmered on the water's surface, occasionally broken by the drifting bodies of men and horses that had yet to be claimed. The stench of death made him want to retch, but he forced himself to stand there, to witness the consequences of war. So many mothers and fathers and wives and children would weep for these men. And for what? Pride, mistakes, half-truths, and grievances that spun out of control. The quiet footsteps behind him heralded Sir Barristan's approach. The knight said nothing for a time. He only stood at Rhaegar's side, gazing at the broken battlefield under a silent moon. At last, Barristan cleared his throat. "Your Grace, tomorrow is a new day. We can begin to clear the field in earnest, to salvage what we can and give the dead their proper rights." Rhaegar nodded. "We must. There is no honor in leaving them for crows." Barristan looked at the prince, lines of compassion on his face. "You have done what few thought possible, defeated Robert Baratheon at the height of his strength. The realm will speak of this for years to come, but I sense your heart is still heavy." "Venerable." Rhaegar lifted his gaze to the stars, letting the hush of the night close around them for a moment. "My heart is heavy because the realm is not yet whole," he said quietly. "I've prayed to the Seven that no more innocents will die. But Father's shadow still looms, and the rebellious lords will not surrender without some surety of justice. And I fear what might happen if Father decides to punish them all." Barristan lowered his voice. "There may come a time, my prince, when you must stand against your father for the good of the realm." He paused, as if wary of overstepping. "I know it is not a light thing to say." Rhaegar felt the words resonate in the emptiness of his chest. He did not respond directly. Instead, he turned and began walking back into the camp, with Barristan at his side. The night air was cold against his cheeks. He wove between tents where men huddled around fires, some telling stories of the day's battle, others too exhausted to speak, simply nursing their wounds in silence. The flicker of torches cast dancing shadows on the ground, and the ever-present stench of war clung to every breath. As he neared his tent, Rhaegar paused. He could see the silhouette of the maester moving around, presumably tending Robert again. A guard or two lingered at the entrance, nodding respectfully to the prince. Rhaegar's side fled with pain, insisting he rest. But an even deeper ache gnawed at him, the ache of a destiny still unraveling in ways he could not fully control. He stepped inside, the warmth of the tent enveloping him. Maester Merrion looked up from Robert's cot. There was a sheen of sweat on the big man's brow. His fever returned. Maester gave Rhaegar a small shake of the head. "He's fighting the infection as best he can. I brewed a poultice, but..." He trailed off, letting the silence speak the words he dared not. Rhaegar approached Robert's bedside. The man's eyes were closed, his powerful chest rising and falling with difficulty. The bandages around his torso were stained anew with fresh blood, or maybe the old wound had seeped through. Robert grimaced, as if some dark dream tormented him. Or maybe it was only the pain. Standing there, watching his Onatime foe hover between life and death. Rhaegar recalled the old stories of how House Targaryen's reign was forged in fire and in blood. Yet he wondered if there could be another way, one that did not demand unending war. If Robert survived, perhaps they could come to an accord. Perhaps the entire realm could breathe again. He sank to one knee, ignoring the pull at his stitches, and bowed his head. He did not know whether he prayed for Robert's survival or for a swift end to the rebellion's champion. All he knew was that whatever the morrow brought, it would shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. That night stretched on, long and quiet, broken only by the soft crackle of the brazier and the rhythmic shudders of Robert's labored breaths. Occasionally the maester replaced the cool cloth on Robert's forehead, muttering small pleas to the gods for mercy. Rhaegar lay back on his own cot, too restless to sleep, drifting in and out of a hazy consciousness. In one moment of half-dream, he thought he could hear the whispered chord of harp strings, see a swirl of blue winter roses and the flash of indigo eyes. Then the vision scattered, lost to the flickering shadows. Dawn came in a slow, muted glow, barely illuminating the river outside. The day began just as cold, the shapes of men moving about the camp in quiet acknowledgement that there was more work to do, burning the dead, securing the perimeters, sending out envoys to spread the word of Robert's defeat. No songs of triumph rose here, only the heavy hush of aftermath. Some men knelt in prayer, grateful to have survived. Others cleaned and oiled their weapons, uncertain of what new battles might lie ahead. Rhaegar roused himself, ignoring the ache in his muscles. His side burned, but the pain had dulled somewhat. When he glanced to where Robert lay, he saw that the man still had not woken. He did, however, seem a touch calmer. The feverish flush had faded from his cheeks. Maester Marion, blinking bleary eyes from lack of sleep, offered Rhaegar a subdued nod. He might have turned a corner. He's no longer burning so fiercely. None. Relief kindled in Rhaegar's chest, though he tried not to let it show too openly. Robert living was not an automatic guarantee of peace, but it opened possibilities. The Crown Prince gave a small dip of his head. "Good," he murmured. "Tend to him well. I'll see that you have all you need." He turned away, stirring the tent flap aside and stepping out into the new day. Outside, the sky was still gray, promising yet another day of chill. Soldiers moved with slow deliberation, their eyes still haunted by the memory of the previous day's slaughter. Rhaegar felt something stir within him, a renewed determination to ensure this was the last large-scale battle the realm would see for a long while, if he could help it. He moved among the men, offering a word of thanks here, a nod of recognition there. Some bowed deeply, reverently, as though they now saw him not just as their prince but as the living embodiment of House Targaryen's might. Others watched him with cautious respect, uncertain what kind of ruler he might prove to be. In their eyes, he caught a glimmer of hope that perhaps the madness of the king would not extend to the son. If Rhaegar could manage to steer the kingdom away from father's wrath, maybe they would have peace. The hours that followed were spent in council with his knights and several of the captured lords who had been promised parole. The drizzling rain that began mid-morning forced them into a larger command tent, where a table was set up with maps and wax-sealed letters, and the musty smell of damp canvas mingled with the tang of hot spiced wine. One by one, lords and knights approached to parley for the surrender of their houses, ensuring that no violent retribution would befall them if they bent the knee. Rhaegar granted them as much clemency as he could without appearing weak. He insisted on hostages from certain families known for fierce loyalty to Robert, a measure to guarantee good behavior. But he also promised no further destruction of their lands, no burnings, no atrocities. By midday, ravens had been sent flying to the Eyrie, to River Run, to Winterfell, and to King's Landing, each carrying tidings of the victory at the Trident and the prince's terms. Rhaegar hoped that Eddard Stark and Jon Arryn would at least pause to consider them before continuing the fight. For their sakes, and for the realm's, he prayed they would choose peace. His own men, tired and battered from the battle, began the slow process of cleaning up the banks of the Trident. Lines of corpses were laid out, soon to be burned or buried. A somber hush fell, save for the quiet sobs of those who recognized a friend or brother among the dead. Rhaegar took no pleasure in the victory now, confronted by the sheer weight of lives lost. All of it reminded him of the cost that had been paid. In the late afternoon, the rains lessened to a faint drizzle. Rhaegar stood by a small field pyre that had been prepared for the bodies of lower-born men who had no one to claim them. The stench of death was thick in the air, and smoke mingled with mist. There, he bowed his head and whispered a prayer to the seven for their souls, feeling 1,000 regrets spool through him. It was the prayer of a prince who wished he could have found a better way. When at last the ceremony ended, he returned to check on Robert. An unspoken ritual by now. The Baratheon was still unconscious, though the fever had not returned. The maester had changed the bandages and said that Robert's wound showed signs of healing. A day or two more would prove decisive. Rhaegar lingered, studying the big man's face, recalling the unstoppable fury he had displayed. Even in slumber, Robert's brow twitched with tension, as though haunted by nightmares. That night, as Rhaegar lay awake on his cot, he found himself wishing that Robert would recover quickly. If the man was to die, better it happened sooner, so the realm could move on. Or so Rhaegar tried to tell himself. Yet in truth, he knew that Robert's survival might be the key to forging peace. If Robert woke willing to talk, willing, if not to forgive, at least to negotiate, then perhaps the realm could avoid a final cataclysmic confrontation with the rest of the rebels. Sleep eventually claimed him, and he dreamt of dragons, great white beasts soaring over a city built of pale stone. Not King's Landing, but some other place he couldn't name. He dreamt of rubies falling into a river, scattering in the water. And he dreamt of a quiet voice calling his name, beckoning him to follow. Yet he could not. When he woke at dawn, his heart pounded with lingering unease. And as the day's light slowly broke across the battered encampment, Rhaegar rose to see if the tide of fate might finally be turning. He could only hope that what he had accomplished by defeating Robert at the Trident was the first step on a gentler path for the Seven Kingdoms. If not, the blood spilled here might pale in comparison to what awaited them all. Wah. ADA. Gray clouds clung to the horizon in ragged shapes as morning settled over the wounded camp. Thin beams of pale light filtered through the haze, painting the churned earth in shades of pewter and dun. A brisk, persistent wind blew in from the river, carrying the tang of cold water and the lingering traces of death. Lances of sunlight caught on twisted metal and broken banners, the only hints of color in a landscape dominated by mud and ash. Now and then, a raven's caw cut through the camp's dull hum, a reminder that messages and omens both traveled with dark wings in these times. Rhaegar rose from the small cot, where he had spent another restless night. The ache in his ribs, where the maester's stitches were still pulled tight, had become a steady throb that pulsed with every movement. He breathed gingerly, fearing that a single ill-judged motion might tear open the mending wound. Outside, the voices of soldiers murmured in subdued tones. Metal clinked, either from armor being shifted, or cooking pots clanging as men sought a morning meal. Though the camp stirred with the new day, the weight of sorrow hung in the air. They had won the Trident, yet the realm still trembled at the edge of chaos. He brushed aside the canvas flap, and the chill wind met his cheeks. Across the narrowing puddles that had been left from the previous day's rain, men worked to finish the grim labor of collecting and identifying the dead. Some had been placed on piles of wood and straw, awaiting pyres. The loyalist host had begun to reorganize, forging small detachments under trusted captains to keep order and to ensure that stray rebels or looters did not wreak havoc nearby. No one had any appetite for further bloodshed, yet the tension of the realm's uncertain future lingered like an unspoken threat. Ducking beneath the tent ropes, Rhaegar found Sir Barristan Selmy waiting outside, helm in the crook of his arm. The lines of worry around the Kingsguard knight's eyes spoke of too many nights spent awake, too many hours watching over a prince who balanced the realm's fate on a precarious scale. Barristan offered a short bow. "My prince," he said in a voice just loud enough to be heard over the wind. "How does the wound fare?" Rhaegar tugged at the edge of his tunic, feeling the bandages beneath. "Better each day, though the maester still warns me against pulling at the stitches." He regarded Barristan, catching a flicker of concern in the older knight's gaze. "And Robert?" Barristan cast a glance at the large command tent a few rows away. He remains as he was, neither fully conscious nor near death, according to Maester Mirian. They feed him a tincture to keep him under, lest his pain undo the healing the maesters tried to manage. Rhaegar pressed his lips together. A swirl of emotions rose in him. Relief that Robert still lived, but also an uneasy sense that time was slipping away. Each hour they lingered here, Father was left in King's Landing to his own devices. Each hour gave the rebels further opportunities to regroup if they had the will to resist. The realm dangled between war and uneasy ceasefire. He offered Barristan a nod and set off through the maze of tents. Sentries snapped to attention. A few men, still wearing the Targaryen three-headed dragon on their cloaks, bowed low, murmuring greetings. Some offered congratulatory words on the victory at the Trident, but their voices were careful, subdued by the memory of how close the battle had been and how much had been lost. Rhaegar acknowledged them quietly, unsure if he had the strength to wear the mantle of triumph. When he reached the command tent, the flap was parted by a guard wearing the red and black. Inside, a cluster of knights and lords milled around the large table, where maps of the continent were weighed down by stones and bits of armor. A brazier glowed in one corner, lending a thread of warmth that curled through the damp air. Rhaegar's entrance drew their immediate attention. "My prince," Ser Jonathan Darry said, bowing. He had removed much of his armor, but the white cloak of the King's Guard hung from his shoulders, streaked with mud near the hem. "We've received a new set of tidings overnight. A raven arrived from King's Landing." His voice was measured, bearing no sign of relief. Rhaegar felt a subtle clench in his chest. "From my father?" he asked. Jonathan nodded. "In part, it seems the king was advised of our victory. However, the message is not entirely from him. It carries the official seal of the hand, Lord Carlton Chelsted, though the phrasing is peculiar. It outlines that the king is most pleased to hear the rebellion was quashed at the Trident, and that the traitors must be brought to King's Landing for punishment. There is also a note that you must return as soon as Robert Baratheon is stable enough to face the king's justice." Diamond scowl. Rhaegar's shoulders tightened. He remembered the last time Father's justice had been administered, when Lord Rickard Stark had been burned alive in the throne room, forced to watch his son strangle in a torture device. That horror had sparked the rebellion's rage in the first place. With Father's mood as unpredictable as wildfire, bringing Robert into the king's presence could doom any hope of reconciliation. Rhaegar inhaled slowly. "And there is nothing else?" Ser Jonathan shook his head. "Only a command that we must press on to flush out the remaining rebels, ensure their submission, and proceed at haste to King's Landing, carrying the heads of your enemies if they resist." Silence settled over the men in the tent. Rhaegar's gaze traveled from Jonathan's face to that of Miles Mouton, then to each of the gathered knights who had pinned their hopes on him. The weight of his father's cruelty was no secret. Murmured discontent among these men said what they did not dare voice aloud, that Aerys Targaryen would only escalate the violence if given the chance. Rhaegar touched the hilt of a dagger at his belt, almost unconsciously. "Then we must decide how to proceed carefully. Our victory at the Trident was decisive, but the realm is not yet at peace. I will not see it torn apart by fear of my father's retribution." His words trembled on the edge of boldness, skating close to outright defiance. "We've begun receiving surrenders from the Lesser Lords. They know Robert Baratheon's defeat signals the collapse of the rebellion. Still, we cannot simply turn them over for slaughter." Several knights exchanged anxious glances. One of them, a gray-bearded man with deep-set eyes, Lord John Mouton of Maidenpool, father to Miles Mouton, stepped forward. "Prince Rhaegar, I speak on behalf of many families who bent the knee, or who are willing to bend now that the rebellion's cause has lost its champion. They fear King Aerys's temperament. The realm has seen too many burnings, too many tragedies. We ask only that you guarantee our safety and that of our households." "Vanity." Rhaegar listened, absorbing each desperate syllable. He recalled the quiet heartbreak in Elia's eyes when she spoke of how the realm whispered about Aerys's madness. He remembered how even the Targaryen loyalists questioned whether they could truly trust the king's judgments. He drew in a breath. "I understand your concerns," he said softly. "I cannot pretend my father has not cast a dark shadow. But for now, I must reassure you that anyone who has laid down arms on my word shall receive clemency from the crown. That is my promise." "I know." A hush followed, as if they half expected King Aerys himself to burst through the tent flap and rage at such a bold statement. After a moment, Sir Barristan cleared his throat. "The lords will believe you, my prince. But we must ensure that your father's commands do not undo that promise. The time to reconcile father and son's competing visions for this war may be near, and it will not be an easy meeting. Rhaegar nodded. "I know." His eyes flicked to the largest map on the table, the one showing the entire continent from the wall down to the Dornish coast. "Sir Miles, any word from House Tully or House Stark?" Miles Mouton glanced at the scattered parchment. "No fresh ravens since yesterday. The last we heard was that Lord Stark and Lord Tully are still gathering forces near Riverrun. But rumor claims they've lost the taste for open battle. Some smaller skirmishes have erupted near Harrenhal as a few loyalist houses press the advantage, but nothing large enough to alter the overall tide." He looked up, meeting the prince's gaze. "They may be waiting to see if Robert recovers before making their next move." Rhaegar's mind conjured the image of Eddard Stark, young, grim, possessed of a quiet sense of honor. If Ned truly thought Robert was dead, or if he believed Robert was being tormented, he might fight on with renewed vengeance. Rhaegar did not want to push the Starks or Tullys into a corner from which they could only lash out. He exhaled, feeling the stitching in his side twinge. "Then perhaps we should send them more direct word. Let them know Robert is alive, under my personal protection, and that we would welcome envoys to discuss peace terms." "Ben." A murmur rippled through the tent. Some knights looked uneasy. Negotiating with rebels might seem like a concession. But Rhaegar knew continuing the war would be far worse for the realm. On the far side of the table, a knight with a large bruise darkening his temple spoke up, his voice hoarse from shouting orders the day before. "My prince, you have bested the rebellion in open battle. Are we certain we need to parley? Let them fear you. Let them come crawling." "Nan." Rhaegar turned, meeting the knight's eyes. "Fear alone has brought us to this point. My father's rule under fear spurred half the realm to rebellion. I will not chain the kingdom in terror. That is not the king I intend to be." The quiet conviction in his tone silenced further objections. He turned to Sir Barristan. "Draft a raven to Riverrun. Let them know Robert lives and recovers under my care. If they do not believe it, they may send representatives to see for themselves, under a safe conduct. I will guarantee their safety if they guarantee ours." "Then Nemo." Barristan bowed. "Eight once, my prince." In the hush that followed, Rhaegar noticed the trembling in his hands. The wound in his side pulsed, but some deeper ache gnawed at him. The knowledge that each decision drew him closer to a confrontation with his father. Still, for the sake of the realm, that confrontation might be unavoidable. He dismissed the council, leaving instructions for them to continue overseeing the surrender of any rebel stragglers. Then he left the command tent, wincing slightly at the brightening day. The clouds had thinned enough to let through swatches of pale sunlight that warmed the muddy ground, just enough to release pungent odors of decay. He felt a wave of nausea, whether from the stench or from his own exhaustion, he could not say. Gathering his composure, he made his way across the camp toward the tent that sheltered Robert Baratheon. Near its entrance, two guards stood at attention, their expressions carefully neutral. They moved aside to allow Rhaegar within. The interior was hushed, the air close and tinged with herbs and stale sweat. A single lantern swayed on a hook, scattering irregular light across the figure on the cot. Robert was still unconscious, though he stirred fitfully. His bearded face glistened with a thin layer of perspiration. The bandages on his side had been changed that morning, leaving fresh white linen wound around his thick torso, though a faint pinkish stain had already seeped through. Maester Merrion stood nearby, sorting through jars of powdered leaves and unguents. He paused to bow to Rhaegar, though the gesture was overshadowed by the strain in the maester's eyes. "How is he?" Rhaegar asked, stepping closer to the cot. Maester Mirian exhaled. He drifts in and out, but the fever is no longer as fierce. I believe the infection is lessening. He is strong, this one. He clings to life like a bear in a trap. Rhaegar nodded, lowering himself onto a small stool. Let us hope he continues to mend. I need him to wake and speak. The maester spread a new poultice across a cloth, then carefully pressed it against the wound on Robert's side. Though Robert did not awaken, his brow pinched in discomfort. He groaned sometimes, the maester said quietly, as if calling a name. Rhaegar's hand tightened on his knee. Lyanna, most likely, he murmured. She was his betrothed, and he believes. He trailed off, uncertain how much to admit to the maester. So many mysteries still swirled around Lyanna Stark. Her disappearance, the rumors, the swirl of events that had led to the rebellion in the first place. The maester pressed his lips together but did not pry. Instead, he finished applying the poultice and stood, wiping his fingers on a rag. I can only offer potions to ease his pain. If he awakens enough to speak, it could be soon, or it could be days yet. Neversten. Rhaegar remained on the stool, even after the maester retired to mix his powders. He studied Robert's face, the lines etched there by war and anger. A flash of memory. Robert roaring his name on the Trident, muscles straining as he brought the massive warhammer down. That single moment had nearly ended Rhaegar's life. Yet here they were, both battered, both waiting to see what fate would decide. Gradually he became aware of a soft sound beyond the tent walls. A shifting commotion, men's voices raised in urgent greeting. He stood, ignoring the twinge in his side, and stepped out to see what caused the stir. A pair of riders had arrived at the edge of the camp, escorted by a half-dozen Targaryen knights. One rider carried a fluttering banner that bore the crossed keys of House Grafton. The other carried the black bat of House Went. News from different corners, presumably. Both men looked exhausted from hard riding, their horses lathered and blowing foam. As Rhaegar approached, they slipped down from their saddles, bows stiff with fatigue. "My prince," said the man bearing the Grafton banner, his voice rasping. "I bring word from Gulltown, and from certain lords in the Vale. They say Lord Arryn is mustering men in the Eyrie, though not in great numbers. Some Vale lords remain uncertain. Word of your victory has rattled them." The second rider, the one with the Went banner, stepped forward. "I come from Harrenhal. House Went still honors the Targaryens, but the lords near the God's Eye are unsettled. Lord Stark and Lord Tully passed through the Riverlands, mustering what forces they could, but they did not linger. Rumor claims they marched north again, perhaps to the Neck. Now 10. Rhaegar took a moment to digest the information. It seemed Eddard Stark and Hoster Tully might be retreating, or at least moving to higher ground to regroup. Jon Arryn remained an unknown quantity, though apparently not as eager to fling more men into the fray. At least the realm was not uniting around a new figurehead for the rebellion. Robert's fall had sown enough doubt that the pieces of the rebel alliance were scattered. "Thank you," he said to both riders. "Find food and rest. Our camp will grant you shelter." He signaled to a nearby steward to tend to their horses. They bowed again, relief etched on their dirt-streaked features. Even in a realm at war, men sometimes forgot the simple pleasure of warm food and a chance to lay down their burdens. Rhaegar turned away, pressing a hand lightly against the dull throb in his side. The more messages he received, the more convinced he became that the rebellion was faltering, not yet ended, but hobbling along with no clear plan. If Robert Baratheon lived, it might unify the rebel cause again, if he chose to press the fight. But if Robert decided to accept terms once he woke, the rebellion could end without further devastation. Yet that was only half the battle. The other half lay in King's Landing, where Aerys Targaryen waited with a mind diseased by paranoia and cruelty. Rhaegar found himself picturing the throne room, the iron throne looming high, made of 1,000 swords hammered into a twisted seat of power. Father would be perched there, wild-eyed, hair unkempt. If he demanded blood, and the realm expected it, could Rhaegar stand in the way? A fleeting memory struck him. The day he had confronted his father about burning Rickard and Brandon Stark. He had pleaded for clemency, or at least a trial. But Aerys had raged, claiming the Starks were traitors who deserved the dragon's wrath. Rhaegar had not been in the capital when the horror occurred, but the tales of how they died still haunted him. Would Father demand a similar fate for Robert, or for any other rebel leaders who yielded? Gazing into the distance, Rhaegar saw the Trident's broad waters gleaming under the midday sun. The shallows were calmer now, though the stones still bore the stains of battle. He knew that in any future history, the site of this confrontation would be remembered for generations. Some would call it the spot where the Dragon Prince overcame the might of the storm, while others would see it as the graveyard of a hopeless cause. Yet for all that had transpired, the realm's future still hung in the balance. He took a few steps along the bank, letting the rippling current fill his ears. Sir Miles Mouton followed at a respectful distance, as did a handful of guards who insisted on accompanying him. Rhaegar paused, placing a boot on a flat stone near the water's edge, and watched silver fish dart beneath the surface. He found something oddly soothing in the swirl of the river. Miles cleared his throat gently. "Your Grace, we have another matter that needs your attention. Some of the Stormlords who surrendered want to see Robert with their own eyes, to confirm he lives. We're not sure if granting them an audience is wise, but they beg to speak with him. They say they'll swear fealty to you if they know their liege lord remains in your custody. Say, Nason see." Rhaegar recalled the faces of those Stormlords who had fought so fiercely under Robert's banner. Fellows like Lord Penrose, Lord Errol, and lesser knights who wore the crowned stag upon their cloaks. They had grown up with Robert, admired his prowess, believed in his leadership. Perhaps a glimpse of him might calm their fears, or, at the very least, verify Rhaegar's claims. He nodded thoughtfully. "We'll allow a few trusted men to see him, provided they come without arms and do nothing to impede his recovery. Let them know he is gravely wounded. If they accept that, I'll allow a brief audience." Miles bowed, relief in his eyes. "As you say, my prince, I'll arrange it." Rhaegar lingered by the water for a few moments longer, letting the swirl of thought settle. The chill air whipped his hair around his face, and he imagined he caught the faint echo of distant harp strings on the breeze. A memory of simpler times when he still believed music could ease any sorrow. He wondered if the realm would ever hear such gentle chords again, or if war would drown every quiet melody in the clash of steel. At last he turned back to the encampment. The day stretched on with the usual tasks of command. Rhaegar paused to speak with his men, to comfort the wounded in makeshift infirmaries, and to oversee the distribution of rations. He found himself reflecting that once he was certain the rebel lords would capitulate, he would have to march south. Father had demanded it. But how could he safely bring Robert, or any other captured rebels, into the Viper's Nest that was King's Landing under King Aerys? That question dogged him well into the late afternoon, when Miles announced that a small group of Stormlords had arrived at the tent to see Robert. Rhaegar agreed to join them, ensuring nothing untoward took place. Inside the tent, the air was stuffy and thick, scented with the bitter tang of healing salves. Robert lay still upon the cot, half propped on pillows to ease his breathing. The flicker of lantern light cast a somber glow across his broad features. The Stormlords entered, 4 men, all unarmed, each escorted by a Targaryen knight. They bowed quickly to Rhaegar, but their eyes went at once to Robert. The man at the forefront, thick about the waist, and with a receding hairline, inhaled sharply. "Robert," he whispered, as though calling to a dear friend. Rhaegar stepped aside, allowing them closer. "He is alive," he said, his voice subdued. "The wound was grave, but the maester's skill and his own stubborn will have kept him from dying." One of the other men, younger and bearded, lowered himself to one knee beside Robert. "My lord," he murmured, "gods be good, we thought you lost." Robert did not stir. His breath was shallow, though steadier than it had been, and his eyelids fluttered. The men exchanged looks of mingled hope and grief. At last, the older one spoke up, addressing Rhaegar. "My prince, we don't know what your intentions are for him, but we beg mercy. He is the Stormland's rightful lord. Our loyalty to him drove us to this rebellion." He trailed off, unsure how much to say. Rhaegar answered softly, "If you had known the king's cruelty, or the complicated truths behind this war, you might have chosen differently." The Stormlord's mouth twisted. "Aye, we never wanted half the realm ravaged. Many followed Robert out of love and out of anger for what happened to Lady Lyanna Stark. Now, the war is lost, isn't it? Rhaegar looked down at Robert's pale face. He could still see the man who had swung that hammer with unstoppable force, the warrior who had shaken the very bedrock of Targaryen rule. "It need not continue," he replied. "Bend the knee, pledge your fealty to the crown, and the Stormlands will be spared father's wrath, if I can help it." He paused, letting the unspoken tension remain. "But Robert's fate is not mine alone to decide." The men exchanged glances. They all seemed to understand the nuance. King Aerys still sat the Iron Throne. Rhaegar's mercy might hold here in this camp, but once they all reached the capital, the king's brand of justice could overwhelm all reason. At length, the older lord sighed. "We cannot speak for every man of the Stormlands, but for ourselves, we see little choice. We beg your protection. Thou..." One of the younger men choked out the words as if they tasted bitter on his tongue. "We swear ourselves to you, Prince Rhaegar, and to the crown, in exchange for Robert's life." Rhaegar's chest tightened. Once more, the burden of father's anger weighed upon him. He could make promises now that he might not be able to keep if father insisted on punishment. But he would try. He nodded slowly. "I understand. Remain here under my hospitality. Draft letters to your bannermen if you wish to urge them to yield. I will do all in my power to see that mercy is granted." The men gave low bows, turning to gaze at Robert a final time. One of them gently touched Robert's hand, as though to impart some small measure of comfort, then rose. They left quietly, their faces marked by fear and a slender hope. Rhaegar looked down at Robert, noticing how shallow each breath remained. "They love you," he murmured under his breath, though Robert could not hear. "They believed in you enough to follow you into open revolt. If only we had found some path to avoid all this." Then he thought again of Lyanna, of how her disappearance and father's brutality had ignited Robert's rage. He thought of the prophecy that had once guided Rhaegar's own steps, the prophecy that made him believe certain actions, however dire, might be necessary. Now, surveying the wreckage of the realm, he was no longer certain of anything. Destiny and duty felt like two edges of a sword he could hardly wield. Exhaustion clung to his bones, and he knew he must rest. Another night blurred by, filled with the half-sounds of the camp. The distant braying of horses, the watch-calls of sentries, the occasional wail of a wounded man. He slept fitfully, dreaming of a red door in a house by the sea, the echo of harp music drifting through the halls. A time of innocence, long since lost. When dawn broke, it brought a shift in the wind that carried a biting cold from the north. The soldiers moved quickly to feed fires, to keep themselves from shivering in the open air. Rhaegar rose early, the wound in his side prickling. The maester replaced his bandage, applied a fresh salve, and insisted he refrain from exertion if possible. Rhaegar only half listened, preoccupied with the new day's duties. He set out to inspect the lines of men near the perimeter of the camp. The farmland beyond had been ravaged by the armies passing through. Crops trampled, barns looted, fields scarred by hooves and footprints. Yet here and there, a farmer's family still clung to their homestead. Rhaegar ordered his men to spare what they could, to pay for any supplies taken. It was a minor gesture in the grand scheme, but perhaps it would sow a seed of goodwill. Too much wanton cruelty had already been done in the name of House Targaryen. Late in the morning, another messenger arrived, this time flying the sigil of House Tully. The man was whisked directly to Rhaegar's presence. He looked half-frozen, his cloak torn by branches. Bowing low, he produced a letter. "From Lord Hoster Tully, my prince. He sends his respects and indicates, well, that he may be open to negotiation now that Robert Baratheon is no longer leading the charge." Rhaegar took the parchment, noting the Tully trout seal broken, the letter corners damp. He scanned it swiftly. The words were guarded. Hoster Tully acknowledged the defeat at the Trident and floated the possibility of a meeting, neutral ground, where House Tully and House Stark might at least hear Rhaegar's terms, but only if they were assured that Robert truly lived and was treated with dignity. Rhaegar felt a glimmer of possibility stir in him. He turned to Barristan, who lingered near. We have an opening here. If we can gather the Tullys, perhaps the Starks, and persuade them to lay down arms, the war might effectively end." Barristan frowned slightly. "And your father's reaction, my prince? We both know the king would rather see them all burned than pardon." Rhaegar's grip tightened on the letter. "He would," he admitted. "But we can keep them from father's wrath if we prove that a negotiated surrender will bring them back into the fold of the crown. My father cannot execute them all, or he risks losing the entire realm's faith. Even the lords loyal to the throne would not stand for such a monstrous betrayal of terms, not after so much bloodshed." Barristan nodded slowly, though concern lingered in his eyes. Rhaegar understood. Aerys had proven unpredictably cruel in the past. But the more men who rallied to Rhaegar's style of leadership, mercy, negotiation, stability, the fewer would tolerate a return to senseless brutality. He looked again at the messenger. "Return this reply. I will meet with them. We can choose a site near Harrenhal or the Crossroads Inn, whichever is most acceptable. I will provide safe passage to their envoys. And yes, Robert Baratheon is alive." He paused, thinking carefully. "Tell them I can offer proof, if they wish to send a small party to see for themselves. I give my word as a prince of the realm that their safety is guaranteed." "Nanter." The messenger bowed, relief flickering in his tired eyes. "Thank you, my prince. I shall bear your words with haste." Not long afterward, Rhaegar found himself in the thick of more administrative tasks. Prisoners who had surrendered had to be sorted. Commoners released if they swore no further part in the war. Knights offered parole in exchange for ransoms or hostages. Some Targaryen knights bristled at the leniency, but others recognized that it was the only way to rebuild a shattered kingdom. By midday, the once muddy battlefield had dried enough that carts could roll more easily. A procession of wagons carried bodies wrapped in simple cloth, ready for burning or burial. Priests of the Seven walked alongside, chanting quiet prayers. The acrid smell of smoke still rose from one corner of the encampment, where pyres were lit at intervals. The crows had grown bold, circling overhead, feasting on the unlucky remains that had not been recovered. Now and then, the wind shifted, and the stench of decay enveloped the camp, making even hardened soldiers gag. Rhaegar retreated to his tent in the early afternoon, exhausted more by the moral weight of leadership than by physical exertion. Sir Miles and Sir Barristan joined him at a small table where wine and stale bread had been set out. Rhaegar accepted a cup of watered wine, swirling it absently. "This is no victory feast," he said with a hint of bitterness, glancing at the meager fare. Miles nodded. "A victory feast wouldn't feel right even if we had the stores for one. Men are too weary, and the realm—" "Well, you've seen it." Rhaegar set down the cup. "If the Tullys send an envoy, and if we manage to coax the Starks into a parley, we might see an end to the main hostilities. But we must be prepared if Father orders me to break those accords the moment we set foot in King's Landing." Barristan placed his helm on the table, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I will stand with you, my prince, whatever your decision. The same can be said for much of the King's Guard. But the gold cloaks in the city remain under the King's direct command. There may be trouble if the King decides to seize your prisoners, or your person." "Damn." Rhaegar stifled a grim laugh. The idea of Father turning on him felt both impossible and strangely plausible. He remembered the last time Father had refused to trust him. Speaking of betrayals in every corner. "We must proceed carefully," he said. "For now, I'll focus on forging peace with the rebels. One step at a time." Outside, the afternoon wore into a dull twilight, the clouds thickening again. Rhaegar took it as both a mercy and a curse that it rained again, pattering on tents and muffling the sounds of the camp. He dozed for a while, lulled by the steady drumming overhead. The wound at his side ached, but the maester's salves had at least kept it from infection. That he was alive to feel pain felt like a peculiar blessing in a war that had cut down so many. The following morning broke cold and damp. Rhaegar rose before dawn, striding out of his tent to find the ground slick. Torches still flickered among the tents as men prepared for another day of cautious waiting. A hush lay over the camp, the hush of uncertainty. By the time the sun crawled above the horizon, Rhaegar found his way yet again to Robert's tent, steeling himself for the same routine. A glance at the man's bandages, a question for the maester, a hope that Robert might awaken. But as he neared, he heard raised voices within. Pushing the flap aside, he saw Maester Mirian bent over the cot, his face lined with worry, while Robert Baratheon, his eyes open at last, struggled to rise. "You damned fool," Robert snarled, voice still hoarse and raw, but recognizably laced with that old ferocity. "You think I'll sit here and be poulticed like a child? Where in the seven hells am I?" He attempted to swing his legs off the cot, but the pain must have shot through him, because he let out a groan and sank back. The maester tried to steady him, urging him to remain still. Robert swore loudly, each breath ragged. Rhaegar stepped forward slowly, hands raised to show he bore no immediate threat. "You're alive," he said calmly. "This is my encampment near the Trident. You were struck down in battle." Robert's gaze snapped to Rhaegar. For an instant, confusion furrowed his brow. Then recognition lit his eyes with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You," he growled. He tried to sit up again, ignoring the maester's protests. "I remember. You were pinned under my hammer. No, gods be good, did you best me?" His voice shook with fury and something akin to shame. Rhaegar kept his tone gentle. "The battlefield had its own will, Robert. We fought, and you were wounded, gravely, but you survived." Robert's nostrils flared. "Why am I not dead? Why haven't you finished me?" 1,000 answers sprang to Rhaegar's mind. He chose the simplest. "Because enough blood has been shed, and I do not believe your death will serve the realm." He nodded to the maester, who hovered anxiously. "Let him be, maester. Robert is awake now, so we must treat him as a man, not a corpse." The maester stepped back, wiping his brow. Robert grimaced, pressing a hand to the bandages on his ribs. He seemed torn between a desire to stand and an inability to do so without screaming in pain. At length, he glared at Rhaegar. "If you're hoping for my gratitude, Targaryen, you'll not have it. You've cost me my war. And Lyanna," he spat, voice cracking. "Where is she?" Rhaegar's heart lurched. He swallowed. "She is not here. I can tell you that she is well. But let us speak of that when you're not about to tear your stitches. Too many men have died for the sake of misunderstandings and half-heard rumors." Robert's eyes burned with fury. A memory of the unstoppable presence on the battlefield flickered in Rhaegar's mind. Even in a sickbed, Robert seemed like a bull about to charge. "Don't speak to me of rumors," Robert said, his voice shaking. "I know what I saw. I know what you did where you took her. You..." He coughed, a painful sound that seized his chest. Maester Mirian rushed to support him, but Robert batted the man's hand away, more gently this time. Exhaustion was quickly overtaking him. Rhaegar waited, letting Robert catch his breath. When Robert managed to speak again, his tone was harsher but weaker. "What do you want of me? Why keep me alive?" Rhaegar met his eyes. "I want peace," he said. "The realm cannot endure more slaughter. Your people want you to live. If you yield, if you end this rebellion and help me unify the realm, perhaps we can find a path that doesn't lead to more pyres." "In..." Robert's scorn twisted his features. "Yield? You want me to kneel to the Mad King? The same butcher who burned Ned's father and brother alive?" Another spasm of pain creased his forehead. "Never." Rhaegar sighed. "I want you to kneel so we can restore order before thousands more die. I won't let father commit more atrocities if I can prevent it." A bitter laugh rose in Robert's throat, though it broke into a grimace. "You think you can control the Mad King? Then you're a fool, Rhaegar. He'll burn me and half the realm if it suits his fancy." "Nenenchal." Rhaegar swallowed the knot that formed in his throat. He could not deny that fear. "We have a chance," he said quietly. "To do better than that. But I need you alive, and not baying for Targaryen blood, if the lords of the Stormlands, the North, and the Riverlands are to stand down." For a moment, Robert only breathed heavily, staring with undisguised hatred. Then his head lolled back against the pillow. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes deepened, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "Lyanna," he muttered, as though the name was a painful brand. "All this started because of her." Rhaegar closed his eyes briefly. "We'll speak of her," he promised. "Once you have regained some strength, the realm must come first now. No more men should die for a cause that's already lost." Robert let out a long breath. His eyes, though clouded by fever, fixed on Rhaegar with a furious intensity. "Go then," he growled. "I cannot stop you. I'm your prisoner." Rhaegar knew this was no place to push further. He gestured to the maester to tend Robert's outburst. The Baratheon lord glowered as Rhaegar turned away, but the prince did not miss the flicker of fear beneath that rage. Even a man as mighty as Robert could feel the chill of helplessness, wounded and alone in an enemy's camp. Stepping outside, Rhaegar exhaled, the cold air striking his face. He felt a tremor run through him, part relief that Robert had awakened, part dread at how complicated the next steps would be. At least Robert's condition had improved enough for him to speak. If Rhaegar could persuade him that kneeling did not mean immediate death by fire, perhaps the war could truly end. He walked into a morning muted by the heavy clouds. Soldiers gave him respectful nods as he passed. He heard subdued cheers from a group of men who had just learned that some friend or brother had survived the previous day's wounds. Small mercies in the midst of devastation. Rhaegar was conscious of every detail. The slosh of mud underfoot, the swish of standard cloth in the drizzle-laden breeze, the occasional whimper of a nearby wounded man. War left no shortage of ghosts. Midway through the camp, he came upon a group of disarmed rebel knights who had surrendered 2 days past. They were speaking quietly to Targaryen loyalists, presumably discussing the terms of their parole. Once, such knights might have spat curses at Rhaegar's name. Now they glanced at him with apprehension, uncertain how to greet a prince who had unseated their champion but offered them mercy. Rhaegar paused, acknowledging them with a small inclination of his head, before continuing on. He reached a slight rise in the ground where a large Targaryen banner hung limp in the still air. Beyond it, a small vantage point overlooked the river. From there, he could see the entire sprawl of the camp, the lines of tents receding into the distance, the smoke of fresh pyres drifting overhead. A hollow silence pressed in on him. Victory, they called it. But how hollow was a victory that left the realm in tatters? Sir Barristan caught up to him, breath misting in the cold. "Robert is awake?" he asked, eyes alert. Rhaegar inclined his head. "Yes. He lives and he rages, though he can't even stand without doubling over in pain." Barristan studied Rhaegar's face. "Will he yield?" Rhaegar's jaw tensed. He's not ready to speak of surrender. His hatred for father, and for me, still burns. But I think a part of him knows the war is lost. He might come around if we can prove that kneeling won't lead him straight to the pyre. Barristan nodded grimly. "We must hope so. If he refuses to yield, the Stormlands might remain a hotbed of resistance. And the North will follow Ned Stark, who holds Robert as dear as a brother." Rhaegar stared out at the muddy waters of the Trident. "I have to convince him. The alternative is more blood spilled, and father would relish the excuse to unleash terror." "Don't worry." Barristan's silence spoke volumes. After a moment, Rhaegar forced himself to straighten. "Let's call another council. We must prepare for a meeting with Lord Tully, or whomever he sends. With Robert conscious, perhaps we can show them proof of life. If that doesn't sway them to negotiate, nothing will." He turned away from the vantage point, the Targaryen banner drooping overhead like a tired sentinel. The gloom in the sky seemed to weigh upon his shoulders. Yet a sliver of determination lit his eyes. If there was any chance to end this war without more wholesale slaughter, he had to seize it. Robert might curse him for it. Father might label him traitor to his own blood. But Rhaegar would not flinch from what needed to be done to save the Seven Kingdoms from descending into madness. He made his way to the command tent once more, footsteps steady and sure despite the nagging pain in his side. The day was young, and the realm waited for its prince to shape the next chapter of the war. A hush followed him, a silent question echoing in every mind. Would the dragon truly bring peace? Or would the seeds of hatred sown on the Trident bear fruit in a new wave of bloodshed? Standing at the threshold of the tent, Rhaegar paused, letting the swirl of half-formed hopes and fears settle within him. Then he parted the flap, prepared to face the gathering of knights and lords, to lay out his plan, one step closer toward the unsteady path that might end the rebellion. If the gods did not forsake them, if Father's madness did not sweep aside all mercy. And as he entered, he steeled himself with the thought that for once, perhaps, Targaryen fire could warm instead of burn. He only prayed that it was not too late for such a flame to guide them all out of the darkness. Ken. Rhaegar stepped into the command tent, with the cold wind at his back. The canvas walls rustling in agitation, as though they too sensed the weight of his decision. Within, the brazier's coals glowed in a low, steady burn, and a group of lords and knights waited around the heavy wooden table. The flicker of lantern light carved tired hollows into their faces, each man wearing the lines of weariness earned through days of ceaseless vigilance. Outside, the subdued rumble of the camp underscored how many souls relied on the next words uttered here. Ser Jonathor Derry bowed when Rhaegar appeared, followed by Ser Barristan Selmy. A few chairs scraped against the ground as the rest of the assembled men shifted to give the prince room. Rhaegar advanced toward the table, one hand pressed discreetly to his still sore side. He noticed parchment scraps, half-finished letters, and a scattering of small figurines that had been used to mark troop positions. Each fragment of parchment was another pledge of fealty or request for terms. Each figurine represented men who might soon die if the realm's fragile step toward peace collapsed. Rhaegar rested both palms on the edge of the table, inhaling once to steady his voice. "Robert is awake," he said. The statement stirred immediate interest. A few men exchanged uneasy looks, though none spoke at first. "He's feverish, weak, but lucid enough to know he's lost the Trident. And for now, he refuses to consider kneeling unless I can prove he won't be delivered to the king's pyromancers the moment we arrive in King's Landing." Benebirshimher. A hush followed. At last, Lord Penrose, who had been one of the Stormlords most anxious to see Robert, ventured, "You told us you would protect him. If Robert still doubts your word, is there anything that might reassure him?" Rhaegar lifted his gaze. "He trusts no Targaryen. Not yet. Can we blame him after what befell House Stark in the throne room?" He paused, pushing aside the painful memory. "But if we can gather the rebel lords, Stark, Tully, Arryn, and bring them to a neutral ground, if we show them Robert alive, in stable condition, perhaps we can broker a formal surrender that guarantees no mass executions." Sir Miles Mouton spoke up next, arms folded. A parley at a site of their choosing might help ease their fears. "But what of your father's commands? If he hears we're negotiating with rebels rather than dragging them back in chains, will he not send his own men or raven forth more vitriolic orders?" Rhaegar thought of that possibility often. Even now, he expected another raven from King's Landing to arrive, brimming with father's fury. "We cannot control what my father sends, but we can control how we act here. The lords who witness our mercy will return to their seats, not to sow further rebellion, but to keep the peace. And if the king attempts to punish them regardless, he will face more than their wrath. He will face a realm that refuses to condone further cruelty." His voice rose slightly, surprising himself. "We must remember that many lords still loyal to the crown do so out of respect for House Targaryen's lineage, and for me, and for my children. They will not willingly watch the realm descend into another spree of burnings." Silence clung to the tent. Barristan shifted his stance. "Your Grace, the risk is great. If you oppose your father publicly—" "I do not seek open opposition," Rhaegar cut in, though his tone remained respectful. "Only moderation. A gesture of clemency, so we do not wage war upon men who are ready to lay down arms. If father will not offer it, then I must." "No." Across the table, a hard-eyed knight let out a sigh. "Prince Rhaegar, none question your wisdom. But Robert Baratheon has been the heart of the rebellion. Even if he's wounded, might it not be safer to keep him hostage until we force the other rebels to yield?" Why risk bringing them together in a parley? Rhaegar shook his head. Hostages alone will not ensure peace. The Stormlands might rise again once Robert recovers, unless he agrees to truly end the fight. As for the North, Lord Stark will never bend if he believes Robert has been tortured or killed. We need Robert's voice to quell the final pockets of resistance. He paused, gazing at the men around him. I do not say this lightly. I fought him on the Trident and nearly died. But if the realm is to heal, we must show even our enemies that there is a better path than revenge. Several long moments followed, the men weighing his words. Then Lord Penrose, who wore a tattered cloak bearing a faint stag sigil, dipped his head. Then let it be so, if it prevents more bloodshed. I will write again to my bannermen, urging them to accept your mercy. My only request is that you not punish them for refusing to continue a hopeless cause. Rhaegar inclined his head, silently grateful. They shall have my mercy, as I pledged. The same goes for any rebel who lays down arms. With that, the informal council ended, each man dispersing to carry out his duties. Rhaegar lingered by the table, thinking of the weight that father's next raven might carry. He ran a thumb over the polished wood, worn smooth by men's elbows leaning over it in the midst of war. The lamp overhead sputtered, casting shifting shadows on the map. He stepped outside into a half-hearted drizzle. The sky wore a patchwork of gray clouds, half concealing the sun that glowed weakly behind them. Dampness seeped into the ground, turning the earth slick. The breath of hundreds of men mingled in the cool air, a persistent background hum of camaraderie and exhaustion. A cluster of Stormland knights had set up a small cooking fire near their tents, and from it rose the scent of onion broth, faint but enticing. Making his way toward Robert's tent, Rhaegar found the area under heavier guard than usual. News of Robert's awakening must have spread, and Targaryen soldiers were taking no chances. One of them, wearing scratched plate and a stained surcoat, saluted stiffly. "Your Grace," he said, "we've kept the curious at bay. Some men wished to see the prisoner themselves, but we refused them entry." Rhaegar nodded. "Well done. Let only the maester pass unless I say otherwise. Robert needs rest more than he needs spectators." The guard bowed, stepping aside. Rhaegar slipped inside to find the interior lit by a single lantern. Rain tapped on the canvas roof in a gentle patter. Maester Marion knelt by the cot, checking Robert's bandages and murmuring something too soft to overhear. Robert's broad chest rose and fell, though his eyes were open, hooded with fatigue. When Rhaegar appeared, Robert's gaze flickered toward him. The corners of Robert's mouth tensed, not quite a snarl, but no friendly greeting either. Rhaegar inclined his head. "How fares your pain, Lord Baratheon?" he asked. Keeping his voice calm, Robert's mouth twitched in what might have been a grim attempt at laughter. "It feels like a mountain fell on my ribs," he rasped. "But at least I'm breathing, though I wonder how long that will last." The maester gently tucked the fresh bandage in place. "He's healing, Your Grace, but the pain is still significant. I've offered dream wine, which might help him rest." Robert's jaw clenched. "Don't want to sleep. Don't want to close my eyes and wake to find your father looming over me with a torch in hand." Rhaegar heard the genuine fear laced beneath the bravado. "My father is not here," he said quietly. "If I have my way, he will not lay a hand upon you. But we can speak more freely if your mind is not so clouded by agony." Robert's breathing grew labored. He glowered, but after a moment he nodded once curtly. The maester eased a cup into Robert's hand, and Robert drank a few swallows. A shiver passed through him as the potent brew slid down his throat. His expression wavered between sullen anger and that old fierce spirit. Once, Robert Baratheon had been unstoppable on the battlefield, a towering presence who rattled enemies with a single war cry. Now he lay pinned by his injuries, forced to rely on the mercy of those he despised. Rhaegar watched as the lines of pain began to soften on Robert's face, the medicine taking hold. He chose his next words carefully. "I mean to open negotiations with Stark and Tully, so they'll stand down without further war. A parley on neutral ground. I want you there as well, if your strength allows." Robert's eyes narrowed, though his lids drooped from the dream wine. "What good does that do me? All you want is for me to help you pacify them. Then once we're all in your net, Your father will torch us. Nansa. Rhaegar's tone remained even. That will not happen. I have made it clear to the loyalist lords that any betrayal of terms is unacceptable. The realm is weary, Robert. Not even the most steadfast supporters of House Targaryen want to see half the nobility put to the torch. My father's threats lose their weight if none will carry them out. Robert let out a bitter sound, somewhere between a grunt and a scoff. Then you don't know how fear works, Targaryen. Some men do anything if the king commands, especially a king known for punishing those who refuse. Narwin. Rhaegar was silent for a moment. He thought of the gold cloaks in King's Landing, of the pyromancers who had so gleefully made wildfire at Aerys' behest. He thought, too, of the thousands who had died simply because father perceived a slight. There are lines no man should cross, he said softly. Perhaps I was blind to them once, but not anymore. Robert's glare did not relent. So you say. Then tell me, why did you take Lyanna? Was that crossing a line, or was that some royal prerogative you clung to? Bassisturm. The question, so direct, coiled tension in Rhaegar's chest. Maester Marion cast his eyes aside, feigning distraction with the bandages, clearly not wishing to intrude on that thorny matter. Rhaegar closed his eyes for an instant. I can't speak of Lyanna as though she was a thing to be taken or not taken. But I will say that if you think I abducted her against her will, you are mistaken. Robert's jaw set. I'd call you a liar, but I don't have the strength to yell it. Lyanna was betrothed to me. She never would have gone willingly with you. Besinko. Rhaegar's voice dropped. Robert, you don't know her mind. Shut your mouth, Robert hissed, voice slurring with the drug, but no less vehement. If she's not locked in some tower, show me, or let her speak. Let her tell me to my face that she wanted your company. Then I'll believe you. He made to sit up, face contorting in pain once more. The maester hurried to steady him, scowling at the strain Robert caused himself. Stop, Rhaegar said firmly, though not unkindly. You'll tear your stitches. Lyanna is in a safe place, far from the chaos of this war. If you're willing to come to terms, if you truly want her well-being, you will negotiate rather than lash out blindly. Then, Robert sagged back, breath rasping. The mention of Lyanna had ignited an old, simmering rage in him, but the wound and the dream wine conspired to leash his ferocity. He turned his head away, eyes bright with unspent fury. You'll have your damn peace talk, Targaryen, but I'm not bending the knee just yet. Rhaegar accepted that for now. You need rest, he murmured. Heal first. Then we can argue properly. Desi. He left the tent, heart pounding. Every part of him knew that the matter of Lyanna Stark was a crack in the foundation of any peace. Robert burned with jealousy and heartbreak, and Ned Stark's sense of honor would be outraged if Lyanna had been forced into anything. Rhaegar understood that the truth was more complicated than Robert's accusations, but how to convey that to a man who'd built his entire war upon the premise that the Targaryens had wronged the Starks? Outside, a dreary hush lay over the camp. The drizzle had slowed to a fine mist that collected on armor and cloaks, turning them dark. Rhaegar closed his eyes briefly, letting the damp chill his skin. He remembered the quiet voice in his dreams, the swirl of blue roses, the sense of destiny that once guided him to believe he was fulfilling a prophecy. Now it all seemed overshadowed by the realm's suffering. He moved to the small grouping of tents where his own retinue waited. One belonged to Sir Barristan, who emerged as soon as he spotted the prince. Without preamble, Barristan said, Your Grace, word came from the men we sent north. They made contact with some of Stark's outriders. It seems Eddard Stark is at Moat Cailin, still uncertain if he should remain defensive or attempt to push south again. Rhaegar nodded. We must get a raven to him at once. I'll craft a letter urging a parley. We can arrange neutral ground near the Crossroads Inn, or even near Harrenhal if they prefer. If Robert recovers enough to travel, we can bring him, proving he's not in chains or half dead. Barristan hesitated, then spoke softly. My prince, if we bring Robert outside the safety of this camp, might it not endanger you? A single moment of weakness, a single loyal man to Robert's cause, and we could see another attempt on your life." Rhaegar's mouth tugged into a small, ironic smile. "That is a risk, yes. But confining Robert here forever is no solution. We must demonstrate good faith. Stark and Tully will suspect a trap if Robert never appears in person." He paused, running a hand through his silver-gold hair. "If we truly want to end this war, we must trust that men can choose reason over vengeance." Barristan bowed. "Very well. We'll do as you command. The letters will be prepared and sent with our swiftest riders. Hopefully we can arrange this meeting within a fortnight." Rhaegar cast a glance at the gray clouds overhead. "The gods willing, yes. Meanwhile, we must keep discipline in the camp. No man should harass the locals. Pay for any supplies taken. I want no more reasons for the small folk to hate the Targaryen name." "Me too." Barristan placed a hand over his breastplate in a sign of acknowledgement, and the two parted ways. Rhaegar, tugging the damp cloak tighter around himself, strode toward his personal tent. Inside, he found a small brazier burning low. The warmth beckoned him, and he settled onto a wooden chair, stretching out stiff legs. The ache in his side had grown sharper from all his walking. A squire approached, bowing. "Your Grace, do you need anything?" "Fresh bandages, perhaps." Rhaegar waved him away gently. "I'll call the maester if I need more than rest. See to it that my knights have something warm to eat. Morale can't slip." The squire scurried off. Rhaegar shut his eyes for a moment, letting the crackling flames soothe him. He recalled Ilya's face in King's Landing. Anxious, overshadowed by father's dark moods. He feared for her and the children. Had father begun to suspect Rhaegar's mercy might be an act of treason? Or perhaps, for now, father reveled in the knowledge of Robert's downfall. Rhaegar could only guess at the madness twisting the king's mind. He dozed lightly, swirling in half-dreams. Lyanna's voice whispered through them, though he could not quite catch her words. When he roused, the tent had grown dark except for the faint glow of the brazier. Outside, the rain still pattered. "Time to write that letter," he thought, groaning softly as he stood. By the light of a lantern, he scratched out a missive on crisp parchment. His handwriting, once so neat from hours spent practicing lines of verse, appeared jagged and uneven under the weight of fatigue. He laid out the essential points. Robert Baratheon lived, the realm teetered on the brink, and Prince Rhaegar offered terms of safe passage to Lord Stark and Lord Tully for a gathering to discuss peace. No traps, no illusions. He closed with the promise that if they came, they would find Robert under the prince's protection. Battered, but alive. When he sealed the letter with the Targaryen sigil, he stared at the wax for a moment, remembering simpler days in the Red Keep's library, reading tales of noble kings who ended conflicts by forging alliances. He prayed that such an ending was still possible. That night passed in a slow, dreary procession. The steady rainfall lulled the camp into a subdued hush, interrupted only by the occasional cry from a wounded man in the infirmary tents, or the snort of a restless horse. Rhaegar's dreams were filled with swirling images. Father's wild eyes, Robert's warhammer dripping blood, and Lyanna's pale face gleaming in candlelight. More than once, he jerked awake, heart hammering. Each time, he tried to calm himself by thinking of the unborn future he prayed he might yet shape, a realm at peace, a father dethroned from madness or forced into compliance, and houses reconciled. The morning arrived damp and cold. The clouds parted just enough to let some chill sunlight filter through. Rhaegar emerged from his tent, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and found the messengers prepping their horses. He pressed the sealed letter into the hands of the rider bound for Moat Cailin. "Fly with all haste," he said. "Lord Stark must receive this quickly, before he decides to march." The rider, a lean man with a hardened expression, nodded. "I'll make no stops beyond the barest need, my prince." Rhaegar clapped him on the shoulder. "The realm depends on men like you now. Ride swiftly." The man mounted and spurred his horse, hooves slipping a moment on the slick earth before finding purchase. Then he was off, disappearing into the river mist. The second messenger departed soon after, bound for River Run with the same letter, adjusted for Lord Tully. At midday, Rhaegar went to see Robert again, conscious that the man's temper might have cooled or flared anew. The guards outside made way. Within the tent, Maester Mirian was mixing a fresh tonic at a small table, laden with jars of herbs. Robert lay propped up slightly, eyes open but with a dull, half-lidded gaze. He appeared to be awake yet not entirely alert, as though the pain and the dream wine took turns battling for control of his senses. Robert's gaze flickered to Rhaegar, and he let out a faint, humorless laugh. "Here to gloat, Targaryen?" Rhaegar shook his head. "No, Datin. I'll never gloat over the realm's suffering." "No." Robert gave a small snort. "Let me guess. You're going to spout more about peace, about how your father won't burn us all. Fine. Go on." The bitterness in his tone made Rhaegar tread carefully. "I sent word to Stark and Tully. I invited them to a parley, promising they could see you for themselves. If they respond, we may leave this camp in a fortnight to meet them." Robert's lip curled, but he could not muster the energy for a real sneer. "And why should I come with you?" Rhaegar's voice was quiet. "Because if you truly care about the men who followed you, about Lyanna's family, you'll not want them to fight a lost war. A last stand might seem heroic in a song, but in reality, it will only cost more lives. Come and speak to your old friends. Tell them yourself how the war ended at the Trident. Convince them to stop." Robert was silent for a time, eyes flicking over the lantern light reflecting off Rhaegar's armor. Finally, he muttered, "So I'm to be your mouthpiece, telling them to bend the knee or be destroyed?" Rhaegar did not move, though tension wound through his body. "I want them to bend the knee of their own will, not out of terror, but because they see no righteous cause left to fight for. There's a difference, though I doubt you'll believe me." He swallowed, glancing at the bandages peeking out from beneath Robert's loosely draped blanket. "You are living proof that mercy exists. If Father had his way, your head would already be mounted on a spike in King's Landing. But you're still breathing, because I will not see the kingdom forged in more blood." Robert shifted, grimacing. The maester set down a mortar and pestle, peering over with concern. Robert waved him off, exhaling sharply. "If I go to that parley, I'll do it on my terms. You'll not chain me like a dog." Rhaegar inclined his head. "Very well. I'll not have you in chains, but you'll be escorted by knights loyal to me. We can't forget you nearly killed me on the Trident." Robert chuckled darkly, wincing mid-laugh. "Close, but not close enough." He looked away, one hand curling into a fist on the blanket. "Just answer me something. If we do this, if somehow Stark and Tully stand down, what will become of me?" Rhaegar let the question settle, feeling the tension in the air. "You are Lord of the Stormlands by right. I will not strip you of that title if you yield. Your men who followed you will be pardoned. But the price of rebellion is not nothing, Robert. There may be hostages required, certain reparations. Father will demand something. I'll work to ensure it's not your life or your lands." Robert said nothing for a long while. At last, he lifted his gaze, meeting Rhaegar's eyes. "I don't trust you," he said bluntly. "You're still Aerys's blood, but if I can spare the Stormlands from his wrath." He looked away, swallowing. "Do you really have Lyanna, or is that another lie?" Rhaegar took a slow breath. He knew no easy answer would satisfy Robert's suspicions. "She's alive. Safe. No harm has come to her. When the realm is stable, when we can speak without swords at our throats, I will gladly let her speak for herself." Robert's entire body tensed at that, conflicting emotions roiling across his face. Fury, longing, betrayal. He pressed his eyes shut, refusing to let tears form. Rhaegar could almost feel the heartbreak radiating off him, tempered by unrelenting anger. After a moment, Robert said, "I'd almost rather you'd killed me on the Trident." Rhaegar frowned. "Why say that?" "Because if she's with you by choice, then I've lost her anyway," Robert rasped, voice cracking with bitterness. "And if she's been forced, then I failed to protect her. Either way, I lose." A pang of guilt and sorrow quaked inside Rhaegar. He hadn't thought to see such vulnerability in Robert's eyes. He laid a hand on the edge of the cot, not quite touching Robert's arm but near enough that his presence was unmistakable. These events were set in motion by more than either of us understood. "We can't change what's past," he said softly, "but we can decide what future the realm has, whether we keep cutting each other down or find a path that spares as many as possible." Robert's eyes shifted away. He did not speak again, and the silence in the tent felt heavier than any battlefield Rhaegar had stood upon. At last, the prince moved back, giving the maester a small nod. When he stepped out, the damp air seemed to cling to him like a shroud. The next several days passed in a tense lull. Patrols scoured the surrounding countryside for stray rebels or opportunistic bandits. A few more small groups came forward to yield, some on behalf of minor houses sworn to the Baratheons or the Tullys. Rhaegar did what he could to ensure they were treated fairly. He spoke to the men in the camp, letting them know that the conflict was nearing its end. Assuming Eddard Stark and Hoster Tully agreed to parley. One afternoon, a raven arrived, bearing a simple message from River Run. Lord Tully would send an envoy to the Crossroads Inn in a fortnight's time to hear the prince's terms. Another bird arrived soon after from Moat Cailin. Eddard Stark would likewise dispatch a representative, though the note was curt, clearly mistrustful, demanding proof that Robert truly lived. Rhaegar dispatched swift riders bearing the invitation to personally witness Robert's condition here in the camp, if they desired, though the timing was tight for such a journey. Still, any step toward conversation was a victory of sorts. Throughout this period, Robert's strength improved, though slowly. The fever receded, and he managed to sit upright for short spans. The pain of his ribs remained fierce, forcing him to rely on the maester's potions. A simmering resentment glowed in his eyes whenever Rhaegar visited. But he seemed resigned to the necessity of a peaceful settlement, if only to save his own stormlands from devastation. One cold, drizzly evening as Rhaegar headed to his tent, a messenger arrived from the south, clad in a sopping cloak bearing the royal colors of King's Landing. The man knelt in the mud, trembling with cold and exhaustion, offering Rhaegar a leather case sealed by the hand of the king. By the flickering torchlight, Rhaegar recognized Lord Chelsted's seal. He opened it at once, scanning the contents with growing tension. The letter was short. Lord Chelsted, as hand, relayed that King Aerys demanded a swift conclusion to the rebellion, and that all traitors be brought to King's Landing in chains. The king insisted on a public demonstration of Targaryen power to quell any further dissent. Yet the letter did not mention Robert's name specifically, only those who led the rebellion. It concluded with a chilling line. The king expects his heir to remember that fire and blood are the words of House Targaryen, and to act accordingly. Rhaegar let the parchment slip from his fingers, glancing at Barristan, who had read over his shoulder. The older knight's face was grim. "Your father is giving you no room for compromise, it seems." Rhaegar pressed his lips into a taut line. "He wants me to deliver Ned Stark and the Tullys, likely to the same fate as the elder Starks. That would only reignite war across the realm." A wave of frustration coursed through him. "If we do as father commands, we gain nothing but more bloodshed. If we refuse, we risk being labeled traitors ourselves." Barristan spoke calmly, but with urgency. "We must thread the needle, my prince. If the parley succeeds, the realm might rally behind your brand of peace, enough to resist any extreme orders from King's Landing." Rhaegar nodded, though a cold sweat broke across his brow. He was gambling that a realm weary of war would side with him over the king. If he was wrong, father's vengeance could burn them all. Yet there was no alternative that did not lead to further ruin. He penned a swift reply to Lord Chelsted, informing him that negotiations were underway for the final surrender of the rebels, which would accomplish the king's aims without requiring a public spectacle of cruelty. He did not mention Robert by name. Sealing it with the Targaryen sigil, he handed it to the messenger. "Ride back as fast as you can. Inform the hand that we proceed with the king's will to end the rebellion." The messenger bowed and departed, leaving Rhaegar standing in the drizzle, shoulders tense. He noticed a few soldiers watching him from the corners of the campfire's glow, curiosity etched on their faces. They too must have wondered what new orders the Mad King had sent. Evening settled into a long, cold night. Rhaegar could not sleep. He paced inside his tent, the brazier's dying embers casting flickering shadows. Over and over, he turned father's letter in his mind, imagining the horrors that might unfold if Aerys decided to take matters into his own hands. Wildfire caches beneath the city. Pyromancers eager to earn the king's favor. Thought of King's Landing in flames haunted him. His wife, Elia, and their children were there, as well as thousands of innocents who had no part in the war beyond being unfortunate enough to live in the capital. At last, near the hour of the wolf, he sank onto his cot, letting exhaustion drag him into a restless slumber. His dreams twisted again. Images of father's laughter echoing in a throne room, lit by green fire, Ned Stark kneeling over charred bones, Robert howling with rage on the banks of a black river. And through it all, Lyanna's voice whispered just beyond hearing. When dawn came, the rain had finally stopped, though a dense fog hung in the air. Campfires crackled as men gathered around them, warming hands, sharing bits of breakfast, dried fruit, hard bread, strips of salted pork. Rhaegar slipped outside, letting the chill hit his lungs. Another day, another step toward the parley that might determine the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Sir Miles Mouton joined him, carrying a rolled parchment. "My prince, Lord Tully's envoy has been spotted a few leagues away. They rode through the night. They will be here before midday." Rhaegar's eyes widened slightly. That was sooner than expected. "Have we any idea who comes in Lord Tully's name?" "Seems it's a small party. 5 men, possibly knights or highborn. One of them might be Lord Tully's brother or a nephew. Hard to say." They approached under a flag of truce. "Dulker Wand." Rhaegar nodded, adrenaline stirring in his veins. "Make ready. We'll greet them with courtesy. Prepare a space near the command tent for them to rest and ensure no one harasses them." He recalled father's letter, how he demanded traitors in chains. Would father call these men traitors? Undoubtedly, but Rhaegar intended to treat them with dignity. By late morning, the Tully party arrived. Rhaegar watched from atop a slight rise, the fog drifting away in patches. The riders wore cloaks in the deep red and blue colors of House Tully, each brooch fashioned like a silver trout. The lead figure was a sturdy man with red hair shot through with streaks of gray, a trimmed beard on his square jaw. He dismounted, and after a tense moment, Rhaegar stepped forward to greet him, accompanied by Sir Barristan and Sir Jonathor Darry. The man bowed stiffly. "Prince Rhaegar, I am Sir Desmond Tully, cousin to Lord Hoster Tully. I come to see if your claims of mercy hold weight." Rhaegar inclined his head. "Welcome, Sir Desmond. The war need not continue, and I mean to see it ended without further slaughter. I trust your journey was unhindered." "No." Sir Desmond's eyes flickered around, taking note of the numerous Targaryen soldiers. "We traveled carefully, mindful we might be walking into a trap." He met Rhaegar's gaze. "Lord Tully hopes your talk of peace is sincere, but we must see Robert Baratheon ourselves. We've heard rumors that you spare him only long enough to humiliate him publicly." Rhaegar stiffened at the mention of humiliation, remembering father's demands for a spectacle. "You have my word, Robert is no puppet on a leash. He's wounded but alive, recovering under my maester's care. If you wish to speak with him, you shall, provided you respect the maester's instructions. He's not yet strong enough to endure extended agitation." Sir Desmond gave a short nod. "Very well. Lead on." They escorted the Tully envoys through the camp. Soldiers parted, many eyeing the newcomers warily. The Tully men looked about, brows furrowed at the sight of the black and red banners. Some bodies still lingered on pyres in the distance, a reminder of the battle's toll. Eventually, they reached the large tent where Robert was kept, and the guards allowed Rhaegar and the Tully men inside. Within, a hush greeted them. Robert lay upright, pillows braced behind his broad shoulders. His face was paler than usual, but some color had returned since the worst of his fever. The bandages were hidden beneath a loose shirt. When Robert's eyes landed on the Tully cloaks, a flicker of relief and shame both passed across his features. "Desmond," he croaked, "you're a sight." Sir Desmond stepped forward, giving a quick bow to Robert. "My lord, we feared the worst." "Oh." Robert exhaled, chest hitching slightly. "I'm alive, no thanks to Targaryen steel. My hammer wasn't enough at the Trident. His gaze slanted toward Rhaegar, though there was no immediate venom, merely exhaustion. They've kept me breathing so I can talk sense to you and the others. So I guess that's what I'm supposed to do now. Sir Desmond studied Robert's face, wincing at the bruises and the lines of pain. And is that your own wish, my lord? Or have they forced it on you? Robert grunted. No one forced me to speak. I prefer to be fighting instead of lying here, but that's not an option. The war is lost, Desmond. He paused, shifting. They could have killed me. The father would have if he had his way. But Rhaegar... He hesitated, looking vaguely ill to be praising a Targaryen. Rhaegar stayed his hand. Silence fell. The Tully men exchanged glances. Finally, Sir Desmond cleared his throat. Lord Tully will want to know all that you've witnessed. Is it your counsel that the Riverlands yield? Robert's eyes flicked shut for a moment, as if recalling the carnage on the Trident. Yes, he said eventually. Yield. No more men need die for a cause already lost. I'd not have more good lads butchered on my account. Sir Desmond let out a breath. Then we shall carry your words to Lord Tully. I only pray your lives are truly spared. Rhaegar spoke then, careful to keep his tone measured. Lord Tully has my promise and the promise of many loyal lords who stand with me, that there will be pardons and no mass reprisals. The king's final word is complicated, but I can assure you, the realm itself will not abide further atrocity. The realm has bled enough. Sir Desmond regarded him with cautious respect. We shall see if that holds true when faced with King Aerys's appetite for punishment. Still, I'll bear your message. He turned once more to Robert. Is there anything else you wish to convey, my lord? Robert coughed softly. Just that I'll not meekly watch if Targaryens break their word. But for now, let the fighting end. That was all. Sir Desmond and his party departed to rest briefly, as Rhaegar offered them a meal and shelter before they rode out again. Once they were gone, Rhaegar turned to Robert, finding the big man trembling slightly from the exertion of holding himself upright. The maester quickly moved in, adjusting pillows and urging Robert to lie back. Robert cursed under his breath but allowed the assistance. When the maester stepped away, Robert glared at Rhaegar, though the anger was more hollow than before. Don't think this changes anything between us, Targaryen. I'll do what I must to save my men, but if I ever see a chance to hold your father accountable... Rhaegar inclined his head. I understand, and you are not alone in that sentiment. One step at a time, Robert. Thou. Robert sank back, closing his eyes. The tension in his brow smoothed slightly, as if the exhaustion was finally overtaking him. Rhaegar lingered a moment, wondering if it was wise to speak further. But Robert's breathing steadied, and it was clear he had no more fight to spare. With a quiet nod to the maester, Rhaegar slipped out of the tent. A crisp wind brushed across his face. Clouds shifted overhead, allowing a slant of sunlight to illuminate the muddy bank of the river. Men toiled there, cleaning armor and repitching tents as the ground dried. Occasionally, a glint of sunlight caught a piece of broken weaponry or the battered remains of a shield. Rhaegar's own armor bore fresh dents and scuffs from the battle. He had not bothered to replace it. These scars were testament enough to how close death had come. He made his way to the command tent, where Sir Miles Mouton waited with news that another small group of Stormland Knights had arrived to yield. These knights would also bear word to their lords that Robert was alive and urging surrender. Slowly, the pieces of the rebellion were coming undone. Like a tapestry unraveling, each thread loosening at the edges. Days slipped by in this cautious dance. Letters arrived from the Vale, half-heartedly declaring neutrality, as Jon Arryn reportedly weighed his options. Rumor claimed that a younger brother of Arryn's marched east with a handful of men, but had no illusions of facing the Targaryen host. Meanwhile, scouts reported no major rebel army anywhere near the Trident. The war, it seemed, had truly ground to a halt. At last, the time approached to depart for the Crossroads Inn, where Tully's envoy, and perhaps even representatives of House Stark, would gather. Robert, still far from Hale, insisted on traveling under his own power. In truth, he could barely manage more than a few steps outside his tent without gasping. But each day he tried to walk a bit further, leaning on a crutch that the maester had provided. On the morning of departure, the sky was clear for once, a crisp blue arching overhead. The entire camp buzzed with cautious excitement. Dozens of Targaryen knights would ride as the prince's escort. Additional soldiers would remain behind to keep the camp, as many wounded men could not travel. Rhaegar gave instructions to bury the last of the dead properly, to avoid leaving them for carrion crows. Fires had smoldered for weeks now, but the land deserved some measure of rest. Robert emerged from his tent, eyes narrowed at the bright sun. He wore a loose-fitting tunic over fresh bandages and a heavy cloak emblazoned with the Baratheon stag. The cloak draped over one shoulder, concealing how he leaned on a sturdy walking stick. His face was drawn with lingering pain, but the line of his jaw remained proud. When he spotted Rhaegar among the mounted knights, he gave a curt nod, no more or less than an acknowledgement of the role they both had to play. Rhaegar mounted a silver destrier, gingerly due to the wound in his side. The pain flared, but he steadied himself. Barristan and Miles flanked him, each astride their own war horses. A handful of the Kingsguard formed a protective circle. Robert, despite his protests, was offered a docile horse that would not jostle him too badly. He grudgingly accepted, wincing as he settled into the saddle. "A damnable thing," Robert muttered under his breath. "I feel like a cripple. The men will think I've lost my spine along with the battle." Rhaegar overheard, but chose not to comment. This was Robert's private bitterness to wrestle. Instead, he raised a hand, signaling for the column of riders to begin. They moved out along a muddy track that paralleled the Trident. Behind them, the camp bustle receded, left in the hands of loyal knights who would guard supplies and look after the wounded. The journey to the crossroads inn took several days, slowed by Robert's condition and by the caution of Rhaegar's men. The road was quiet, lined with blackened trees and scorched fields where armies had passed. Now, small folk peeked out from shuttered homes to watch this strange procession. A Targaryen prince riding alongside the once invincible Robert Baratheon, each bearing the scars of their fateful clash. At night, they made camp in ruins of old way stations or in meadows shielded by patches of woodland. Soldiers pitched tents under the moonlight, the flicker of their campfires reflecting off battered armor. Rhaegar would walk among them, exchanging a word here, a nod there, sustaining the morale that rested on the hope of peace. Robert mostly remained by his own small fire, guarded by 2 Targaryen knights. Sometimes Rhaegar glimpsed him staring into the flames, lost in thought or in the dull haze of pain. The nights were cold, and Rhaegar's breath fogged in the crisp air. While staring up at the stars, he found himself wondering whether Lyanna was also gazing at the same night sky. He wondered what she would think of how events had unfolded. If she would resent him for trying to spare Robert's life, or if she would be relieved that a final slaughter had been averted. The future hinged on so many unknowns. Finally, on the 5th day, they sighted the Crossroads Inn. Its stone walls stood at the juncture of the King's Road and the river route that cut west. A scattering of tents already lay pitched in the fields beyond. Banners fluttered, the leaping trout of House Tully, a few others Rhaegar did not immediately recognize, likely lesser lords or knights allied with the Riverlands. An uneasy hush settled over Rhaegar's party as they approached. Robert, set in the center of the formation, looked around with narrowed eyes. "Traps," he muttered. "They'd be fools to try it. Even wounded, I'd crush a few skulls." Rhaegar kept his face composed. "We must show them we come in good faith. Violence will only ruin any chance of peace. Let's not give them reason to fear us." Now, they rode into the inn's yard, the ground packed hard by many horses' hooves. A dozen Tully men appeared, wearing tabards in red and blue, swords sheathed, but plainly visible. One stepped forward, an older knight with a stern face. He introduced himself as Ser Elys Tully, brother to Lord Hoster Tully. Rhaegar dismounted and offered a polite bow. Ser Elys returned it stiffly, then turned to Robert. Robert eased himself out of the saddle, wincing as he placed weight on his crutch. He managed a nod of recognition. "Tully, surprised you showed." "And Swan." Ser Elys' eyes darted from Robert's bandaged side to Rhaegar's calm expression. A chance at peace is worth nearly any risk, he said. The realm bleeds, and my brother is determined to see it healed if possible. He gestured to the surrounding men. We have a small retinue. More are expected soon, including an envoy from the north, Lady Barbary Dustin, representing Lord Stark. They're on the road behind us, due in 2 days. Rhaegar felt a jolt of surprise at the mention of Barbary Dustin, a name he associated with old grievances. So Ned Stark had chosen to send another voice in his stead. Perhaps that was prudent, given the tension swirling around this meeting. Then we will wait, Rhaegar said evenly. We have ample supplies. Our men can camp in the field, or if you permit, we might stable our horses here. Sir Elise nodded. You may. Though we expect no trouble, we must remain watchful. Perhaps we can find a secure room inside the inn if you'd prefer more comfort. Rhaegar glanced at Robert, who leaned heavily on his crutch, clearly weary from the journey. We'd be grateful for a real bed for Lord Baratheon, he said. He's still healing. Robert grimaced, but did not argue. Sir Elise signaled a few men, who hurried forward to help. Together, they guided Robert inside the inn, which was an old but sturdy structure of gray stone, plaster walls, and large timbers. The smell of roasting onions and hot cider wafted from within, more welcoming than the reek of battlefield camps. Rhaegar followed, feeling the tension in the air as Tully men and Targaryen knights eyed one another with guarded curiosity. In a small private chamber on the second floor, Robert sank onto a bed with a grateful grunt, rubbing his side. Feels good to sit on something that's not the ground, he muttered. Rhaegar lingered in the doorway, uncertain if Robert would want him gone. Before he could speak, Robert waved a hand. You might as well stay. The Tullys want a sign we're not about to turn on each other. Rhaegar took that as a tentative invitation, stepping inside. The room was modest, lit by a narrow window that allowed a sliver of afternoon sunlight. A rush mat covered the floor, and the wooden bed creaked under Robert's weight. A small table held a few clay jugs, presumably with wine or water. Rhaegar poured 2 cups of watered wine and handed one to Robert. Robert took it, eyeing the liquid warily. I've not poisoned you yet, Rhaegar said with a faint note of humor. Robert snorted, the closest thing to a laugh Rhaegar had heard from him. He sipped, grimacing at the taste. Tastes like piss, but I'll take it over dryness. Outside, voices rose as Targaryen men directed the stabling of horses, and Tully knights ensured watch rotations. Rhaegar leaned against the wooden post of the bed, letting silence settle between them for a moment. At last he spoke quietly. When Lady Dustin arrives, she'll be speaking for Ned Stark. Are you prepared to confirm to her face that the war is lost? Robert's eyes flickered with conflicting emotions. Aye, he grunted, swirling the cup in his hand. I'll do it. Ned might still try to do something foolhardy like attack you in your sleep if he believes you took Lyanna forcibly. But better to talk than to keep fighting blindly. Rhaegar exhaled. Agreed. And you may rest assured, I'll not let Father turn any of you into a spectacle. This is our chance to unify the realm without more rivers of blood. Yan. Robert lowered his cup, lips pressed into a thin line. If you can keep that promise, Targaryen, I'll concede you're not as mad as your father. The faintest hint of grudging respect lurked in his tone. But then the moment passed, replaced by a dull scowl. I'll get some rest. My damned side aches like a demon. Rhaegar understood. He inclined his head, stepping away from the bed. I'll let you be. As he turned to go, Robert's voice halted him one last time. Rhaegar, Robert said, stumbling over the name as though it burned his tongue. If this all works out, if you spare Ned and the others from your father's madness, maybe I'll call you friend, but not before. Rhaegar didn't reply immediately. The word friend, coming from Robert Baratheon, carried a weight he never thought to encounter. At length he nodded. I'll earn that, one way or another. He left Robert to rest, heading down the narrow stairs to rejoin the swirl of soldiers in the inn's common room. The Crossroads Inn bustled with tension. Tully men and Targaryen men dividing themselves into separate clusters, though no overt hostility was shown. Thick wooden tables creaked under the weight of travel-stained bodies, and the fireplace at one end of the room glowed with a welcoming blaze. Rhaegar found a seat at a corner table, where Barristan soon joined him, setting down a steaming bowl of stew. The savory smell of carrots and onions made Rhaegar's stomach growl. He realized he hadn't eaten properly all day. Barristan watched him with quiet concern as he spooned up a mouthful. "This place is as neutral as it gets," Barristan said softly. "But so many armed men in close quarters is a recipe for misunderstandings." Rhaegar nodded. "We'll have to rely on disciplined knights to keep the peace. Tully's men look eager for a resolution, not more bloodshed. If the North arrives in the same mood, we stand a chance." He spooned another mouthful, the warmth spreading through him. "How soon do you think Lady Dustin will be here?" Barristan shrugged lightly. "Sareli said 2 days, if the roads are kind. Hard to tell with the weather shifting. But they'll come. Stark must confirm Robert's status. Otherwise, he might remain suspicious." Rhaegar gazed into the flicker of the hearth, lost in thought. "So we wait. A handful of days, a handful of words, to decide if thousands more die or live." The weight of that truth pressed on him. He forced himself to keep eating. He needed strength for what lay ahead. Night descended on the Crossroads Inn, lanterns lit along the walls, and shutters drawn against the chill breeze. Rhaegar made rounds, speaking with the men, reminding them that courtesy was paramount. He encountered Sir Desmond Tully in the common room. The older knight, sipping an ale, expression somber. They exchanged formal nods. No illusions of friendship yet, only the uneasy bridging of a gap that war had created. Upstairs, Robert slept fitfully in his small chamber. Rhaegar checked on him once, standing at the threshold as the maester whispered that Robert was stable, though still in pain. A bottle of pain-killing draught sat half-empty on a nearby table. Robert muttered Lyanna's name in his restless slumber, brows drawn in agony. Rhaegar felt a wave of guilt and sympathy, then slipped away. He retired to a cramped room a few doors down, where a straw pallet waited. The walls smelled of old wood and damp plaster. He dropped onto the pallet, gazing at the sloped ceiling as the candles sputtered. In the quiet gloom, he pictured Ned Stark's face. Solemn, honorable, shaped by the tragedies inflicted upon his family. Would Ned refuse to negotiate? Or would Lady Dustin speak with the same sense of harsh practicality that some rumored her to possess? As exhaustion claimed him, Rhaegar prayed that the next few days would not shatter the fragile peace he had fought so hard to preserve. He clung to the fragile hope that the same land that had witnessed 1,000 battles might now see the forging of a new beginning. If the gods were merciful, House Targaryen and House Stark might at last set down their weapons before Father's madness consumed them all in a storm of fire.